Selamat pagi, selamat datang di meeting kita pada siang hari ini. Perkenankan saya, perwakilan dari Bahasa Global, untuk menjelaskan tata cara penggunaan fitur interpretasi dalam Zoom meeting kita pada siang hari ini. Kepada para peserta, mohon untuk memerhatikan saat join ke dalam Zoom meeting kita di siang hari ini, tolong klik join audio, lalu juga mohon untuk memastikan bahwa Anda mute mikrofon Anda karena Anda tidak berbicara, dan usahakan untuk menyalakan video selama meeting berjalan. Mohon juga bisa untuk mengakses Zoom meeting ini tidak terlalu dekat dengan laptop atau gawai lain Anda karena dapat menyebabkan gaung atau feedback yang tidak diinginkan ketika Anda berbicara. Lalu, terutama untuk memastikan agar fitur interpretasi atau penerjemahan ada di dalam Zoom Bapak Ibu, mohon Bapak Ibu sekalian sudah memastikan bahwa Anda telah mengunduh atau menggunakan Zoom aplikasi versi terbaru. Berikutnya, saya akan menjelaskan cara penggunaan fitur juru bahasa atau fitur penerjemahan dalam Zoom Bapak dan Ibu sekalian. Apabila Bapak dan Ibu ingin mendengarkan dalam bahasa Indonesia, silahkan klik logo bola dunia, lalu bisa Anda klik logo bola dunia tersebut dan Anda pilih bahasa yang ingin Anda dengarkan. Bapak dan Ibu juga bisa untuk mengklik logo 3 titik apabila tidak terdapat dalam Zoom Bapak dan Ibu sekalian. Lalu setelah itu juga bisa memastikan agar Bapak dan Ibu tidak mengklik mute original audio agar Bapak dan Ibu bisa melihat tampilan yang Anda ingin dengarkan. Apabila Bapak dan Ibu mengakses lewat telepon, mohon untuk mengklik logo 3 titik yang ada di interface bawah Zoom dan Bapak Ibu sekalian. Lalu tolong klik language interpretation, klik bahasa yang ingin Bapak dan Ibu dengarkan, lalu jangan lupa untuk klik dan setelah selesai. Lalu Bapak dan Ibu, untuk memastikan kelancaran pertemuan pada hari ini, host dan co-host berhak melakukan mute audio atau stop video partisipan yang sedang tidak berbicara saat mereka tanpa disengaja menyebabkan gangguan terhadap acara. Ini dilakukan untuk menjamin suara pembicara dan juru bahasa tetap jelas. Terima kasih, saya kembalikan kepada moderator kami, Mbak Nia. Kepada Mbak Nia, saya persilahkan.
Terima kasih tim Bahasa Global. Thank you very much for the introduction and house rules. Good morning to everybody from the UK. Selamat siang untuk rekan-rekan di Indonesia. Thank you for attending this introductory training, which is a part of the ongoing bilateral UK-Indonesia collaboration program Mentari for pushing the agenda of energy transition in Indonesia. This training will be delivered by Aquaterra and its partners, Community Energy Scotland and the National Grid. First of all, I would like to ask Pak Krisnawan. Pertama-tama saya mohon kesediaan waktu Pak Krisnawan untuk memberikan sambutan. Pak Krisnawan Anditya adalah Direktur Aneka Energi Baru dan Energi Terbarukan, Direktur Jenderal Energi Baru Terbarukan dan Konservasi Energi, Kementerian Energi dan Sumber Daya Mineral. Tim Bahasa Global, can you move to the next slide, please? Silakan Pak Krisnawan, mohon waktunya untuk memberikan kata sambutan.
Terima kasih atas kesempatan yang diberikan kepada kami. Sudah bisa didengar ya?
Sudah, Pak.
Oke. Allow me, Mr. David Lutman, speak bahasa, because mostly our audience now are from Indonesia, but and then the other side is there is also interpreter systematically. So, yang terhormat Mr. David Lutman, Kepala Sustainable Development Team Kedutaan Besar Inggris Jakarta, Mr. Duncan Bird, Direktur National Grid Group COP26 sekaligus narasumber pada pelatihan ini, Dr. Mark Hull, Community Engineer and Energy Scotland Head of Innovation sekaligus narasumber pada pelatihan ini, para pejabat di lingkungan kementerian, lembaga terkait yang tidak dapat saya sebutkan satu persatu, para pimpinan di PT PLN Persero dan anak perusahaannya, para undangan serta peserta pelatihan yang berbahagia. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat siang dan salam sejahtera untuk kita semua. Puji dan syukur kehadiran Tuhan Yang Maha Esa atas berkat rahmat dan karunia-Nya sehingga pada hari ini kita diberi kesempatan untuk dapat berkumpul dalam pelatihan manajemen jaringan listrik dan integrasi energi terbarukan dalam transisi energi yang merupakan kerjasama antara pemerintah Indonesia dengan pemerintah Inggris Raya di bawah naungan program Mentari. Penyelenggaraan pelatihan ini bertujuan untuk membantu pemerintah Indonesia, khususnya Kementerian ESDM dalam mengembangkan, menegosiasikan, dan menjalankan strategi energi terbarukan yang progresif dan bertujuan untuk mewujudkan dekarbonisasi yang sesuai di tingkat nasional dan daerah. Tak lupa kami ucapkan terima kasih kepada pemerintah Inggris Raya dan tim program Mentari yang telah membantu terselenggaranya acara ini. Para hadirin yang kami hormati, pemerintah telah menargetkan kontribusi energi baru terbarukan pada bauran energi nasional di tahun 2025 sebesar 23% melalui peraturan pemerintah nomor 79 tahun 2014 tentang kebijakan energi nasional. Kontribusi EBT tersebut hingga tahun 2020 baru mencapai 11,2%. Dengan kontribusi pembangkit listrik energi terbarukan adalah sebesar 10,4 gigawatt. Hal ini tentu menjadi PR besar bagi pemerintah, mengingat waktu yang tersisa kurang dari 5 tahun untuk mencapai target. Menjawab hal ini dan sekaligus berupaya untuk mewujudkan transisi energi bersih di Indonesia, Kementerian SDM tengah melaksanakan program percepatan EBT melalui program-program, yaitu substitusi energi primer final dengan tetap menggunakan teknologi existing, seperti misalnya penerapan B30, co-firing, dan pemanfaatan FDF. Kemudian juga melaksanakan konversi energi primer fosil, yaitu terjadi penggantian teknologi pembangkit seperti PLTD atau PLTU, digantikan dengan pembangkit listrik tenaga energi baru terbarukan. Lalu biogas dan pelet untuk memasak menggantikan minyak tanah dan LPG. Penambahan kapasitas EBT untuk memenuhi demand baru, di mana peningkatannya berfokus kepada PLTS dengan memperhatikan periode konstruktif yang relatif lebih singkat. Kemudian juga melaksanakan pemanfaatan EBT non-listrik dan non-BBM, seperti briket, biomas untuk pengeringan produk pertanian dan biogas. Dengan strategi energi nasional 2000-2035, pemerintah telah menargetkan tambahan pembangkit EBT sebesar 38 gigawatt hingga tahun 2035, dengan prioritas pada pengembangan PLTS, dengan tetap mempertimbangkan potensinya yang berlimpah, kecepatan konstruksi, dan harga yang semakin kompetitif. Para hadirin yang kami hormati, transisi energi telah menjadi tantangan global, dan tentunya bukan hal mudah bagi Indonesia. Banyak tantangan yang dihadapi antara lain dalam hal pendanaan dan pembiayaan, akses teknologi murah, kapasitas jaringan nasional, kondisi geografis Indonesia, dan kapasitas SDM. Hal ini tentu saja membutuhkan dukungan dari banyak pihak, terutama dari dunia internasional. Banyak pengalaman dan wawasan dapat dipetik dari negara-negara lain yang telah terlebih dahulu mengimplementasikan langkah-langkah transisi energi seperti misalnya Inggris Raya. Negara-negara bagian di Kerajaan Inggris Raya, termasuk Kepulauan Orkney yang terletak di Skotlandia, memiliki kapabilitas, keahlian, dan rekam jejak yang sangat baik dalam bidang teknologi dan manajemen jaringan listrik, serta pembangkitan dan integrasi energi terbarukan ke dalam bauran energi. Pengalaman sektor publik dan swasta di Inggris Raya dalam memanfaatkan teknologi dan manajemen jaringan listrik yang berkaitan dengan masalah dan tantangan yang dihadapi dalam integrasi energi terbarukan dapat diperluas untuk memenuhi kebutuhan dan target di Indonesia. Para hadirin yang kami hormati, pelatihan ini melibatkan tidak hanya Kementerian SDM, tetapi kementerian lembaga lain yang terkait dalam mendukung transisi energi bersih di Indonesia, termasuk PLN, sebagai pelaku utama dalam usaha penyediaan tenaga listrik di Indonesia. Kehadiran seluruh pemangku kepentingan tidak hanya pembuat kebijakan, tetapi juga pelaku usaha ketenaga listrikan sangat penting untuk memberikan pemahaman yang komprehensif terkait kebijakan transisi energi. Diharapkan pelatihan ini dapat membagi pelajaran yang dipetik oleh Inggris Raya dalam pendekatan dan implementasi transisi energi melalui antara lain integrasi sistem energi terbarukan ke dalam jaringan listrik, termasuk untuk sistem kepulauan khususnya di sisi kebijakan pemerintah. Selain itu juga mendapatkan pemahaman bersama tentang situasi energi Indonesia saat ini dan bagaimana pengalaman dan praktek baik Inggris Raya dapat menjadi input dalam menemukan solusi inovasi untuk mengatasi berbagai tantangan yang telah diidentifikasikan. Para hadirin yang kami hormati, akhir kata kami ucapkan terima kasih yang sebesar-besarnya kepada seluruh peserta serta semua pihak yang turut berpartisipasi dalam penyelenggaraan acara ini. Semoga Tuhan Yang Maha Kuasa memberikan bimbingan dan petunjuknya pada kita semua dalam melaksanakan pengabdian yang terbaik kepada bangsa dan negara. Dengan mengucapkan Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, pelatihan manajemen jaringan listrik dan integrasi energi terbarukan dalam transisi energi secara resmi saya buka. Terima kasih. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Waalaikumsalam.
Terima kasih banyak Pak Krisnawan, Direktur Aneka Energi Baru dan Energi Terbarukan, yang juga selaku Ketua Technical Working Group Pilar Kebijakan Program Mentari. Terima kasih Pak Kris. Next, I will hand over to Alex Barton to say a few welcoming words. Can you move to the next slide, please? Thank you. So, Alex is the Deputy Head of Sustainable Development Team at the British Embassy, Jakarta. Alex, please, the time is yours.
Great, thank you. And selamat siang to everybody and good morning to those in the UK. Just firstly, send some apologies from David Lutman, who can't make it right now, but he's hoping to join later. Terima kasih banyak Pak Krisnawan for your words, and equally I'm very happy to be welcoming everybody to this grid management and renewable energy integration in energy transition training. My Bahasa Indonesia is not very good, so I'm going to give my remarks in English, I'm afraid. And welcome as well to all of our presenters and of course to all of our participants for today and for the next couple of days as well. So, I mean, we've seen very encouraging progress in Indonesia's energy transition in just the last 2 months. So Indonesia has reaffirmed its commitment to reach 23% renewable energy by 2025, but it's also announced a commitment to reach net zero by 2060 or sooner. And as well is looking at the phasing out of significant coal-fired power capacity and replacing it with renewables. These are really exciting commitments and build on those that Indonesia has already made. And the UK appreciates and is very supportive of this commitment. And we're very excited to be delivering courses like this and working with you all through the Mentari program and other means to share our experiences and try to provide support. We understand that this journey is not easy. It will require large amounts of finance and for some new policies and planning processes in Indonesia in order to deliver the level of renewable energy ambition that has been committed to. As a friend to Indonesia, the UK is ready to support Indonesia through this. We know that the energy transition journey is a challenge, not just for Indonesia, but for countries around the world. There are early adopters, such as the UK, who started this journey in the early 2000s. And despite many pitfalls and challenges, it is now reaping the benefit. And as Pat Krisnawan said, our transition journey has not been easy, and there are lots of good things that Indonesia can learn from, but also lots of mistakes as well. We've been through this process and we're ready to share this experience to help Indonesia accelerate its own decarbonisation and energy access programs. The UK was the heart of coal development. We started the coal journey during the Industrial Revolution, and 80% of our electricity was powered by coal just in the 1990s. And even just 9 years ago in 2012, 41% of the UK's power was generated by coal. Today, that figure is less than 2%. And just next year, we will only have one coal-fired power station, and coal-fired power in the UK will be completely phased out by 2024. So it's been a remarkable journey in a very short space of time. And in the first quarter of 2020, renewable energy dominated by variable sources such as wind and solar accounted for over 40% of electricity generation for the first time. And our offshore wind sector in particular has developed faster than anyone thought was possible just a few years ago. We developed this training together with our colleagues at EBTKE to share the UK energy transition story, but also to exchange knowledge between Indonesia and the UK in energy transition, strategic planning, policies and regulations, and in the decision-making frameworks for renewable energy integration and grid management. This will help the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources to develop, negotiate and deliver progressive renewable energy strategies and decarbonisation in Indonesia's energy system. So I hope you enjoy this training, can learn from our wide range of expert presenters, including from our colleagues at Aquaterra, based in Orkney, who are delivering some very exciting and innovative renewable energy developments in the northeast of England, of the UK, and of course National Grid, who have a major role across the entire UK electricity system and have a lot of experience to share. So this week is a great chance to learn from that experience. So I look forward to everybody engaging and asking questions and hopefully learning some lessons that we have learned. And so thank you very much and hope you enjoy this training. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Alex. So thank you again, Pak Chris and Alex, for your opening remarks. Now, before we start the sessions, I would like to invite all participants and speakers to please turn on your cameras so that we could take an official photograph of our event. Tim Bahasa Global, would you kindly please be able to direct the process of picture taking? That would be most appreciated, Mas Kevin, please.
Okay, everyone, could you turn on your camera? We are just going to screenshot those who are turning on their camera. Okay, there are going to be 2 slides, so everyone please keep having a pause while we are having a picture together. We are going to give you a sign in 3, 2, 1, cheese. One more, and 3, 2, 1, and cheese. Okay, thank you, everyone. I'm going to give back to Mbak Nia.
Thanks, Kevin. Thank you, everybody. That was brilliant. So I'll just make a start on the sessions. I will be your moderator for the next 3 days. You can call me Nia. Mas Kevin, next slide. That's it. And next slide, please, Mas Kevin. So I'll just quickly go over what to expect in the next 3 days. And it's just very important to note at this stage that the 3-day training is actually intended to be a very much at introductory level. And this is to cater a large group like yourselves with a variety of background areas, expertise of knowledge and experience. So once we have covered the basic grounds, we will plan for an advanced in-depth training later on in the year, which will be more tailored to your different groups' needs and details requirements. I also understand that there are some PLN colleagues in the audience. Now, we have delivered a shorter and more grid-focused training back in January. So if you were with us then in January, you'll find some or a few similar references, especially on day 2 tomorrow. But overall, this is an extended version, which we hope to be able to bring the different perspectives of different departments, PLN and the ministries come into a together space. Now, going to the events for the next 3 days, we have heard some welcome message from both Pak Chris and Alex for the first event. Now, for today, which is day 1, we'll go over the material around energy transition journey. And tomorrow at the second session, we'll have some discussions and materials around grid management and technical considerations. And on Thursday, the 3rd day, which is the 3rd session, we'll go on looking at the enabling policies and regulations. Now, polls will be posted after each of the topics covered in each day to generate some interaction as well as to understand what participants and the audience are thinking about and how what the perspectives are around the topics given. Also, there will be questions, answers, and discussion sessions after each topic. So please feel free, like Alex and both Pak Chris and Alex have highlighted, that this should be an interactive session. So we'd really like to hear from you. And there is a dedicated space for that during the Q&A and discussions. But also, please feel free to use the chat box. You can type your questions or comments there, both in Bahasa Indonesia or in English. And there is a reminder here that participants are asked to fill in their attendance form online, because this will be used to generate your certificate of completion. Towards the end of the training on Thursday, there will also be a survey or evaluation form that will ask all participants to complete. And finally, we'll close the training by looking at what lies ahead and how we can all participate in shaping those follow-on stages. Next slide, please, Kevin. Okay, so just to get everybody familiar with who the delivery team is, I will quickly go around the room and introduce our team in the sequence of appearance in the next few days. I'll make a start. So my name is Leusrina Garniati. Again, you can call me Nia. I'm originally from Indonesia, but I've been in Scotland for the last almost 15 years. I am Aquaterra's Senior Consultant for Sustainable Energy and International Development. I'm also an Honorary Assistant Professor at the International Center for Island Technology at Heriot-Watt University, and a couple of our students, PhD students, are here and helping us to deliver this training as well. I am honored to be here amongst yourselves, respected colleagues, both from the UK and Indonesia, and who are passionate and in embracing the art of the possible for Indonesia's energy transition. So next, going around the room, we'll have Dr. Gareth Davis. Gareth is Aquaterra's Managing Director. He also sits in Orkney Renewable Energy Forum, OREF, Board of Directors, and he is a member of the Marine Renewable Energy Group established by the Scottish Government. Gareth, would you like to say hi and a quick few words to the group? Gareth, are you still here?
Sorry, yes, great. Good afternoon, everybody in Indonesia. It's great to see so many of you on this link, and we really look forward to engaging with you over the next few days. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Kevin, can I double check that the camera is working fine for all of the speakers going to greet the audience?
Yes, you could see it on your screen if you pull it to the left.
Good. Thank you very much, Kevin. Next, please, Kevin. We have Dr. Mark Hull. Mark is the head of innovation at Community Energy Scotland. He also sits in OREF Board of Director and is an assistant professor at the Heriot-Watt University. Mark, would you like to say hello and a brief few words?
Hello, Mania. Hello. Likewise, it's great to be involved in this. It's great to see so many people and so much interest in Indonesia in new energy solutions in islands. And I look forward to giving you a brief presentation and answering questions later.
Thanks very much, Mark. Next up is Ian Johnstone. Next slide, please, Kevin. Ian is Aquaterra's director. He also sits at the OREF Board of Directors, amongst other roles, in Orkney and other Scottish islands, chairing the Orkney Grid Group and taking the island's case to 3 consecutive energy ministers. He's been heavily involved in the process of getting grid capacity to Orkney and other Scottish islands. Ian, would you like to say hi?
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the training. Looking forward to it. In my past life, I was actually a coal merchant at the beginning of my career, so I've gone through that journey personally, all the way from coal through to renewable. So look forward to giving you some experience later on.
Thanks, Ian. Next slide, please, Kevin. Next up, we have Gaynor Jones. Gaynor is Aquaterra's Business and Sustainable Development Director. She's held non-executive director posts of local and national bodies, including being the chief executive of a company with charitable status. Gaynor, would you like to say hello in a few words, please?
Yeah, hi everybody. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak today, and thank you, Pat Krishnawan, for your keynote address. I'm looking forward to talking to you later today, particularly about sustainable island solutions, and it's really great to be back in Indonesia, even if it is in this virtual world that we're living in at the moment. So I look forward to speaking to you later, particularly about a community perspective.
Thanks, Gaynor. Next slide, please, Kevin. We have also with us John Tullis from Aquaterra. He's Aquaterra's expert consultant. He currently is leading on the reflex replication, which I'm sure will come up in our various discussions in the next few days. He was the COO for an independent renewable energy developer prior to joining Aquaterra. John, would you like to say hello?
Yeah, good day, everybody. Delighted to be part of this training, and I look forward to speaking to you all tomorrow when I'm covering a bit on the UK grid. So good luck and thanks very much.
Thanks, John. Next slide, please, Kevin. We also have with us this morning and tomorrow, we have Duncan Burt. Duncan is COP26 Director at National Grid Group. Until recently, he was the Director of Operations for National Grid Systems Operator. If you could kindly say hello, please, Duncan, and a few words, that would be greatly appreciated.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here. And as John says, you'll be seeing more of me tomorrow as well during the grid training. But thank you very much for the introductions, and really looking forward to the training.
Thanks very much, Duncan. And next one up, please, Kevin. Thank you. We have Craig Dyke. He is the Head of International Decarbonization for National Grid Group COP26 team. Craig was previously Head of Strategy and Regulation for the GB Electricity system. So, Craig, would you like to say hi, please, to the group?
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. I'm very honoured to have been invited along this week to talk about some of my experiences in the UK. My role is to promote some of that peer-to-peer support at a global level to promote decarbonisation in the energy sector. So looking forward to some good conversations this week, going into some more deeper ones as the weeks go on, I guess.
Thanks very much. Absolutely, Craig. Thank you for that. And that brings us to the next slide, please, Kevin. Mas Agung and Henny, both are Aquaterra's associates and both are PhD researchers at the Center for Island Technology at Heriot-Watt University. Mas Agung, would you like to make a start, please, and briefly introduce yourself? Then Henny could follow suit.
Halo, selamat siang Bapak Ibu sekalian di Indonesia. Nama saya Agung Swati. Saya mahasiswa PhD tahun kedua di Heriot-Watt University. Hari ini sampai 3 hari ke depan, insya Allah akan bantu Mbak Nia untuk deliver training ini. Terima kasih.
Thanks, Mas Agung. Henny, would you like to say hi?
Ya, selamat siang semuanya. Nama saya Henny Gunawan dan saya adalah mahasiswa S3 di Heriot University. Saya adalah mahasiswa yang sedang melakukan riset di bidang keuangan dalam energi terbarukan. Please enjoy the training. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Henny. Next slide, please, Kevin. Good stuff. Now, moving on to the first material of the day, I would be grateful, please, if Pak Chris could give us a bit of context in terms of Indonesia's renewable energy landscape. Just a reminder to all participants and speakers that there will be a Q&A and discussion session after this, and we would encourage you to speak directly or write your questions and or comments, whichever you prefer, either during the session or through the chat box, both in either Bahasa Indonesia or English. Pak Krishnawan, please, the floor is yours.
Terima kasih, Mbak Nia. Izin saya share screen dulu ya. Oke. Sudah terlihat ya. Oke.
Sudah, Pak. Aman, Pak.
Aman. Oke. Terima kasih. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat pagi, selamat siang, dan salam sejahtera untuk kita semua. Terima kasih atas waktu yang diberikan saya akan menyampaikan transisi energi melalui energi baru dan energi terbarukan di Indonesia. Saya akan mencoba menyampaikan terkait dengan konteks energi di Indonesia, kemudian transisi energi menuju energi bersih, kemudian bagaimana transformasi energi dan strategi jangka panjang sektor energi, kemudian beberapa regulasi yang kita siapkan dan penutup. Sebagaimana yang tadi sudah saya sampaikan ya, bahwa Indonesia komited untuk menurunkan emisi, baik itu sesuai dengan Paris Agreement dan sudah diratifikasi dalam undang-undang, di mana kontribusi penurunan emisi dari sektor energi adalah 314 juta ton CO2 pada tahun 2030. Dan ini kita upayakan melalui pengembangan energi terbarukan, pelaksanaan efisiensi energi dan konservasi energi, serta penerapan teknologi energi bersih. Dan dalam pertemuan Leader Summit on Climate tanggal 22 April, kembali Indonesia juga menunjukkan komitmennya untuk melakukan langkah-langkah konkret terkait dengan perubahan iklim, baik itu melalui moratorium konversi hutan dan lahan gambut, kemudian juga mendorong green development melalui pengembangan Green Industrial Park di Kalimantan Utara, kemudian juga menyampaikan akan membuka investasi terhadap transisi energi melalui pengembangan biofuel, industri baterai litium, dan kendaraan listrik. Apabila kita ingin melihat capaian NDC Indonesia, pada tahun 2020 capaian realisasi NDC Indonesia dari sektor energi adalah 64,4 juta ton. Seperti itu. Kita lihat total kontribusi dengan countermeasure 1 yaitu target 29%, maka Indonesia harus menurunkan emisinya sebesar 834 juta ton. Sedangkan dilihat di sini, share dari sektor energi adalah 314 juta ton, atau 38% dari total countermeasure 1 yang harus diturunkan oleh Indonesia dengan target 29%. Ada beberapa sektor lainnya. Di dalam capaiannya 64,4 juta ton emisi yang sudah berhasil direduksi, sebagian besar dilakukan melalui energi efisiensi, kemudian energi baru terbarukan, kemudian juga bahan bakar rendah karbon, dan penggunaan teknologi pembangkit bersih. Indonesia dalam hal ini pemerintah dan Kementerian SDM beryakinan bahwa kita sanggup untuk memenuhi target NDC 29% pada tahun 2030. Kita lihat sendiri, kita sudah menyiapkan roadmap, dan salah satu faktor utama untuk mencapai target NDC adalah pengembangan daripada EBT. Sebagai informasi Ibu Bapak sekalian, bauran EBT pada tahun 2020 dalam energi primer nasional adalah 11,2%. Seperti itu, dengan tetap kita masih berkomitmen untuk memegang target EBT pada bauran energi primer adalah 23% pada tahun 2025. Sedangkan pada tahun 2030 kita harapkan dapat mencapai 28%. Beberapa langkah untuk mendorong adalah penyediaan listrik melalui pembangkit EBT, penerapan efisiensi energi, penggunaan bahan bakar nabati, dan juga sedang kita lakukan implementasi co-firing biomas untuk mengurangi konsumsi batu bara PLTU, kemudian juga pemanfaatan kendaraan listrik, dan transisi menuju bahan bakar rendah karbon dan teknologi pembangkit bersih lainnya. Apabila kita lihat potensi, Indonesia memiliki potensi energi terbarukan yang cukup besar. Data kita update utamanya dari hydro dan bio, ini data yang lebih baru. Total potensi yang kita miliki adalah 626 gigawatt. Kita memiliki energi samudra, tetapi apabila kita lihat realisasinya atau komersialisasinya belum ada, karena saat ini masih dalam tahap research. Kementerian SDM mendorong pengembangan EBT ataupun semua energi, tetapi tentu kita melihat bagaimana EBT yang kita kembangkan juga memiliki harga yang kompetitif. Nah, di sini terlihat beberapa EBT ataupun energi terbarukan yang sudah dikembangkan, meliputi panas bumi, bioenergi, bayu, hidro, dan surya. Apabila kita lihat dari kapasitas terpasang pembangkit EBT di tahun 2020, sebagaimana yang sudah saya sampaikan di dalam sambutan, totalnya adalah 10,5 gigawatt. Seperti ini, baik itu dari yang angin, solar, bioenergi, geothermal. Dan di tahun 2021 kita menargetkan kapasitas terpasang pembangkit EBT dapat meningkat menjadi 11,4 gigawatt. Terkait dengan transisi energi, sama dengan negara lainnya, kita juga menuju ke energi yang lebih bersih. Ada 3 pilar yang kita dorong pada upaya percepatannya, yaitu percepatan EBT, kemudian mendorong penerapan kendaraan listrik, dan pelaksanaan efisiensi energi. Apabila kita bicara dengan percepatan EBT, maka beberapa hal yang sudah dijalankan adalah melakukan pertama, substitusi energi primer final, sebagaimana tadi saya jelaskan, teknologinya menggunakan yang sudah ada existing, seperti B30, co-firing, maupun pemanfaatan RDF. Kemudian konversi energi primer fosil, di mana terjadi pergantian teknologi pembangkit, yaitu PLTD atau PLTU digantikan dengan PLT EBT, dan juga biogas dan pelet untuk memasak. Kemudian prioritas penambahan kapasitas EBT kita dorong kepada pengembangan PLTS karena potensinya sangat besar, masa pembangunan yang cepat, dan juga harga teknologinya yang sudah kompetitif. Yang terakhir adalah pemanfaatan EBT non-listrik non-BBN seperti briket, biomas, dan pengeringan produk pertanian dan biogas. Untuk kendaraan listrik juga kita dorong pemanfaatannya sebagai pengganti bahan bakar konvensional kita, BBM, yang importnya juga besar, dan juga pelaksanaan efisiensi energi di mana sampai Desember 2020 juga sudah berhasil menurunkan CO2 emission. Ini sedikit untuk menjelaskan terkait dengan program substitusi energi primer final, yaitu memanfaatkan teknologi yang existing yang ada, yaitu B30, dan saat ini juga sedang dilakukan pengujian B40, B50 di Balitbank SDM, dan pengembangan green fuels. Kemudian yang terkait dengan implementasi co-firing, ini sudah diterapkan oleh rekan-rekan PLN, dilakukan uji coba di 114 unit PLTU dengan total kapasitas 18,1 gigawatt dengan beberapa jenis tipe boilers. Kemudian potensi RDF di mana nantinya kita harapkan pengembangan RDF hasilnya juga dapat mendorong pengembangan ataupun menjadikan feedstock bagi program co-firing. Yang kedua adalah terkait dengan konversi energi primer fosil di mana teknologi harus berubah, yaitu sudah direncanakan PLTD yang dimiliki oleh PLN akan dilakukan konversi ke pembangkit EBT. Terdapat potensi 5.200 unit PLTD yang tersebar di 2.130 lokasi. Seperti ini yang tahap awalnya dengan diskusi yang sedang intens kita lakukan bersama dengan Dijen Ketenagalistrikan dan PLN adalah terhadap 358 lokasi dengan kapasitas 307 megawatt yang akan dilakukan konversi. Terkait dengan penambahan kapasitas pembangkit, sebagaimana saya sampaikan bahwa semua energi didorong pengembangannya, baik itu hidro, surya, angin, panas bumi, dan bahkan di dalam Grand Strategi Energi Nasional sudah diidentifikasikan juga pembangunan PLTN skala kecil di sistem remote seperti ini. Sampai dengan tahun 2035 kami proyeksikan adanya tambahan kapasitas EBT baru sebesar 38 gigawatt. Dan untuk percepatannya, beberapa langkah yang kita lakukan adalah peraturan presiden terkait harga EBT, kemudian pengembangan biomas melalui kebun hutan energi, kemudian juga kita berupaya mensinergikan perizinan PLTA terkait undang-undang sumber daya air, pungutan dan distribusi sehingga lebih memberikan iklim investasi yang lebih baik. Kemudian juga kita melakukan revisi peraturan Menteri SDM terkait PLTS atap. Ini sedikit memberikan gambaran terkait dengan fokus pemerintah untuk lebih mengembangkan PLTS. Terdapat 3 tren yang akan dikembangkan terkait dengan PLTS, yaitu pertama mengembangkan PLTS atap secara masif, di mana target yang kita set adalah sebesar 3,61 gigawatt. Upayanya untuk mempercepat adalah dengan memperbaiki regulasi yang ada saat ini untuk memberikan iklim kepada masyarakat untuk lebih berinisiatif untuk memasang PLTS atap. Kedua adalah kita melakukan pengembangan PLTS skala besar, tidak kapasitas yang kecil 1 megawatt, 2 megawatt, tetapi lebih besar 25 megawatt, 100, 200, dan bahkan bisa skala giga. Ini beberapa target yang kita rencanakan sebesar 5,34 gigawatt yang tersebar di beberapa pulau Indonesia. Selanjutnya juga kita akan mencoba mengembangkan PLTS terapung, di mana PLTS terapung Cirata menjadikan referensi bagi pemerintah Indonesia untuk mereplikit pengembangannya ke waduk maupun danau yang lain. Berdasarkan identifikasi awal, total potensi apabila meliputi waduk dan danau, potensinya adalah sebesar 28,2 gigawatt. Tetapi apabila kita melihat bahwa PLTS terapung ini dipasang koeksis dengan pembangkit tenaga air, maka potensi yang kita dapat sebesar 12,1 gigawatt. Angin juga kita akan kembangkan dengan target sampai 2035 adalah sebesar 3,63 gigawatt, baik itu onshore maupun offshore, seperti itu. Kemudian PLTP juga tetap akan didorong pengembangannya. Saat ini pemerintah sedang melaksanakan government drilling dengan pendanaan dari APBN atau state budget, dan juga berupaya melakukan sinergi BUMN dalam pengembangan panas bumi untuk mempercepat pengembangannya, dan juga memperluas pembangkit yang ada dalam pengembangan PLTP skala kecil, seperti itu. Kemudian PLTA, kita juga akan mengembangkan hidro skala besar dengan total potensi sebesar 7,69 gigawatt, dan juga mini hydro dan pump storage di Jawa. Salah satu hal yang disampaikan oleh Bapak Presiden di dalam Leader Summit on Climate bahwa green industrial akan didorong, maka Kementerian SDM juga mendorong program Renewable Energy Based Industrial Development atau REBIT, di mana pengembangan PLTA berkapasitas besar kita sinergikan dengan pengembangan industri yang ada. Seperti itu, sehingga nantinya produk yang dihasilkan oleh industri tersebut dapat tercipta green product. Beberapa potensi sudah kita identifikasikan, dan salah satu fokus yang sedang didiskusikan, dibicarakan untuk disinergikan, baik itu PLN dan pengembang, adalah di Kayan. Program biomasa seperti ini dengan targetnya, dengan beberapa lokasi. Pembangkit gas, pembangkit listrik tenaga biogas, kapasitas yang akan dikembangkan sampai dengan tahun 2035. Kemudian program hal yang lain juga yang menjadi pilar kedua adalah kendaraan bermotor listrik, di mana Menteri ESDM sudah melakukan launching terhadap kendaraan listrik. Kita harapkan ini dapat mendorong penurunan, tidak saja penurunan bahan bakar BBM, impor BBM, tetapi juga dapat memberikan penurunan emisi khususnya di sektor transportasi, dan juga meningkatkan konsumsi listrik yang saat ini memang cenderung mengalami stagnan dan turun. Tidak hal yang penting untuk mencapai target daripada NDC adalah penerapan konservasi energi. Salah satunya adalah penerapan tadi kendaraan listrik, peningkatan efisiensi untuk memasak. Kita juga mendorong penggunaan kompor induksi, kemudian efisiensi di pembangkit dan di industri. Tadi bagaimana saya sampaikan bahwa energi bersih kita sedang menuju ke sana, tetapi beberapa hal yang perlu saya sampaikan bagaimana kaitannya dengan sektor pembangkit. Bagaimana dengan bahan bakar fosil yang saat ini masih mendominasi penggunaan energi di Indonesia. Dapat kami sampaikan bahwa hal tersebut juga akan dilakukan transformasi, sebagaimana slide terlihat bahwa bahan bakar fosil kita usahakan untuk dapat menggunakan teknologi bersih, seperti clean coal teknologi ataupun CCUS, dengan tentunya ditambah dari net sink dari sektor lainnya. Adapun untuk sektor energi hijau, sebagaimana tadi sudah saya sampaikan, kita tambahkan dengan kendaraan listrik, baterai, dan hidrogen juga akan dikembangkan. Tidak lupa juga smart energy, smart grid, dan konservasi energi menjadi bagian dalam upaya transformasi energi ke depannya. Sebagaimana tadi disampaikan, strategi jangka panjang sektor energi untuk menuju karbon netral, kita berpendapat bahwa peaking energi dapat terjadi di 2040, sedangkan net zero emission berada pada tahun 2060, tetapi dapat lebih cepat apabila ada support dari negara lain. Dalam hal ini, pemerintah dalam Kementerian SDM akan melakukan pengembangan EBT secara masif. Jadi PLTS, PLTB, biomas, geothermal, hydro, energi laut, nuklir, hidrogen, dan juga teknologi BESS akan dimanfaatkan. Di lain sisi, juga akan dilakukan pengurangan pemanfaatan energi fosil atau pemanfaatan teknologinya menggunakan CCS dan CCUS. Yaitu pertama, untuk pembangkit-pembangkit existing, kita arahkan untuk melaksanakan program co-firing biomas PLTU. Kemudian untuk PLTU dan PLTGU retired sesuai usia, di mana kita berharap PLTU terakhir retired di tahun 2058, PLTGU terakhir retired di 2054. Kemudian kita juga berkomitmen untuk tidak ada tambahan PLTU, kecuali yang telah kontrak atau konstruksi, dan apabila dipertimbangkan tambahan pembangkit fosil, maka harus dengan menggunakan CCS, CCUS, seperti itu. Kemudian program PLTB dikonversikan ke pembangkit EBT tetap kita jalankan. On top dari program tersebut, tentu saja pengembangan interkoneksi, transmisi, dan smart grid juga didorong untuk mendapatkan penetrasi EBT yang lebih besar dan pemanfaatan kendaraan listrik. Beberapa hal yang ingin kami sampaikan terkait regulasi, salah satu PLTS yang akan kita kembangkan adalah PLTS atap. Saat ini Kementerian SDM sedang melakukan revisi terhadap Peraturan Menteri 49/2018, di mana beberapa poin penting perubahannya adalah ketentuan ekspor listrik, yang awalnya adalah 65%, ini akan kita tingkatkan lebih besar. Kemudian kelebihan akumulasi selisih tagihan dinihilkan, diperpanjang dari semula hanya 3 bulan saja. Kemudian mekanisme pelayanan akan berbasis aplikasi, di mana saat ini masih berbasis manual. Jangka waktu permohonan PLTS atas atap lebih dipersingkat dengan adanya sistem aplikasi yang terintegrasi secara online. Kemudian perluasan pelanggan yang bisa memasang PLTS atap tidak hanya pelanggan PLN saja, tetapi kita perluas ke pelanggan di wilayah usaha non PLN, di mana saat ini terdapat 53 wilayah usaha non PLN yang sudah mendapatkan penetapan wilayah usaha, dan 34 diantaranya sudah beroperasi. Hal yang kedua peraturannya lah terkait dengan Perpres EBT, di mana kita memberikan harga jual tenaga listrik yang lebih kompetitif, tetapi tetap memperhatikan affordability, di mana ada 3 skim harga jual yang ditawarkan. Pertama adalah feed-in tarif yang dapat berlaku untuk pembangkit EBT sampai dengan 5 MW. Kemudian harga patokan tertinggi ataupun ceiling price yang diperuntukkan untuk pembangkit EBT di atas 5 MW. Yang terakhir adalah berdasarkan harga kesepakatan yang hanya diperuntukkan untuk pembangkit tertentu seperti PLTA piker untuk semua kapasitas, kemudian PLTA sampah, PLTA pembangkit bahan nabati, PLTA energi laut dengan semua kapasitas. Juga kita sedang finalkan permen tentang penugasan kepada PLN untuk melaksanakan konversi PLTD ke pembangkit EBT, di mana dalam tahap awalnya sebesar 307 megawatt PLTD akan kita convert. Mekanisme yang ditawarkan bisa dilakukan dibangun oleh PLN, ditawarkan kepada IPP ataupun melalui mekanisme PPP seperti itu. Adanya nanti kewajiban penyampaian laporan dan pelaksanaan pembinaan dan pengawasan. Sebagai penutup, Indonesia berkomitmen untuk mencapai porsi EBT sebesar 23% dalam bauran energi nasional pada tahun 2025 sebagai bagian dari pemenuhan target CAN dan Paris Agreement. Pengembangan energi terbarukan akan fokus pada teknologi yang memiliki durasi instalasi tidak lama dan memiliki harga yang kompetitif. Tentu saja untuk mendorong semua itu dapat tercapai, perbaikan regulasi menjadi salah satu kunci sukses mendukung percepatan transisi energi menuju energi baru terbarukan. Dan sebagaimana tadi saya sampaikan, beberapa peraturan sedang disiapkan dan kita harapkan ini dapat ditetapkan sehingga iklim investasi dalam pengembangan EBT di Indonesia dapat lebih baik. Demikian yang dapat kami sampaikan, lebih kurangnya kami mohon maaf. Wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Kami kembalikan ke Mbak Nia.
Terima kasih banyak Pak Kris, spot on, just in time. Bahasa Global Team, could you maybe share and launch the poll, please, before we go into the Q&A and discussion? There are a few questions that that we would kindly ask participants to try and participate in. Jadi pertanyaan pertama, Indonesia adalah penghasil keempat terbesar energi ini di dunia dan memiliki 120,5 miliar ton sumber daya ini seperti yang dilaporkan oleh SDM. Apa bauran energi primer terbesar yang dimiliki Indonesia saat ini? Kemudian pertanyaan kedua, tujuan utama Paris Agreement adalah untuk menjaga kenaikan temperatur global jauh di bawah 2 derajat Celcius jika dibandingkan dengan masa pre-industrial. Apa komitmen Indonesia untuk kontribusi nasional yang ditetapkan untuk mengurangi emisi gas rumah kaca? Dan yang ketiga, berdasarkan kebijakan energi nasional, pemerintah menargetkan bauran energi nasional sebesar 25% dari energi baru dan terbarukan di tahun 2025 dan 41% di tahun 2050. Benar atau salah? Silahkan, please give your answers to these 3 very short questions. That's very interesting to see the dynamics of the answers. So for the first one, we can see that coal has the highest answers. And then for number 2, 29% and 41% at the moment is leading as the most cited answer. And for number 3, it's tied, not that far. Good stuff. We'll take a few minutes to give everybody time to think of it. That's good. Great stuff. We still see about 56% that's already voted. Can I ask for everybody else to join in as well, please, to put in your answers? I wish I have a gift to gift out, after of these polling sessions, but never mind. A little bit more. Can I have more answers coming in, please, from participants? That'd be good. Okay. Can BG team close the poll, please? And we could see the results. Very good. Coal is the correct answer for the first one, and most of everybody got that. And then as well as number 2. And yes, there's number 3 is almost 45% to 55%. 45% of you thinks that it's the wrong statement, and 45% of you, 45% of you thought that it's the right statement, and 55% of you thinks that it's the wrong statement. I would like to say there's no right and wrong in this poll, but there are definite answers for this first sessions. And Pak Krisnawan's slides have actually captured all of these points really, really well. Okay, so many thanks for the participation on that first poll. Now, before we start on the Q&A and discussion, could I please remind all participants to fill in your attendance form, because it will be used to generate your certificate at the end of the training. So once you've done that, we now have about 12 minutes, I would say, for a discussion and question and answer. So this is the opportunity for colleagues as well in the UK to, if you want to have some kind of comments or discussions for Pak Kris, whilst Pak Kris is here with us, that would be great. And participants, if any of you have any burning questions, any questions that you would like to put forward related to Pak Kris's presentation, please do so now. I'd like to point out that when we first designed this training, Pak Krisnawan made a very strong statement that this few day sessions will be more about a discussion and to give more for discussion opportunities and for colleagues to be able to exchange knowledge and exchange thoughts. So we have the space for that now. Can I take the first question or comment, please? Can I maybe make a start with inviting Gareth, perhaps? I know you might have some thoughts or other colleagues in Aquaterra.
Yeah, thank you, Nia. And thank you, Pak Aris, for a very good, sorry, Pak Kris, sorry. It's change of guard. Pak Kris, thank you very much for giving us a really encouraging introduction to what Indonesia is doing. And as you said, it's a challenge, but this climate challenge is huge for all of us. But it's really encouraging to see the trajectory that you're mapping out. And I think what is also really interesting is to see that Indonesia is beginning to pick technologies like solar, which is reliable and proven, and the recognition of transport being a key area for improvement as well. And I wonder, in terms of the transport side, is there an opportunity for Indonesia to, for example, be manufacturing vehicles that can be used on the roads, maybe the scooters that we all see in the major cities and also some of the small buses? Is this an opportunity that is being looked at as well?
Yeah, thank you, Gareth, for your question. So yes, one of our priority in the electric vehicles is we can producing in our manufacturing in Indonesia, actually. So for your information, based on the statistics of Indonesia in 2019, there are numbers of fleet in the road around, I'm not mistaken, is 73 millions. And most likely it's come from two-wheelers, and this is the one that we are also going to what you call to convert to the electric vehicles. So we are not only considering that electric vehicles will be implemented for the buses or for the transportations, but also from the official of the what you call the officials from the ministries itself. For your example, for your information, in 17th December last year, we are already having some commitment from not only from the ministries of institutions, including the state-owned enterprises, including the PLN and the local government. They are already committed. Starting this year, they will use the electric vehicles. So we expected with the ministries, the local government, and the state enterprises trying to use the electric vehicle, then it can be replicated and influence the people. And the other side, just recently, the Ministries of Energy and Mineral Resources, through our Research and Development Center, they are already successfully to convert the what you call two-wheeler of a conventional one to become the electric vehicles. So if this is already proven enough, then we can also introduce to the our people to convert the on existing motorbike to become the electric motorbike. That's our expectation actually.
Thanks very much, Pak Chris. Thank you, Gareth. Is that did that answer your questions?
Absolutely, it did, and it sounds even more exciting now.
Yeah,
absolutely. No, that's great. I'm just responding to a question shared in the chat.
And I need to add some information to Mr. Gareth. Even though some people say that yes, you already convert the conventional vehicles to electric vehicle, but in the other side, you still rely on the fossil fuel in the upstream as a supply of the electricity. Yes, we do believe that yes, at the moment we still rely on the fossil fuel, most particularly coal-fired power plant as our main supply of the electricity, but we are doing in gradually. At the moment, we are trying to battle with the emission in the transportation sector. At least using the electric vehicle, it not emit the emission. And then in gradually in the upstream side, we are trying to transform to using the renewable energy. So once it is already what you call fully renewable energy, then the what you call the ultimate goal using the electric vehicle with using the green power plant is one of our ultimate goals.
Yeah, it's really important to understand that it's not just carbon that is the problem. We also have the emissions in the cities and urban areas, and of course the noise as well. So the traffic noise will be reduced significantly.
Sure, yeah.
No,
okay, thank you, Chris.
Thank you both. Yes, I'm just responding a question on the chat box that, of course, the material will be available to share, and all of the presenters' PowerPoint will be available after each day is completed. So you can access that. I'm sure the team from Bahasa Global could help in accessing the material. Okay, so Ian, I see you're typing something. Do you want to just put forward that across?
Well, yeah, it was just, thank you, Pak Nia and Pak Chris. It was just responding a wee bit, following up from what Gareth said. We in Orkney have been looking at ferries and vessels because they are big users of fossil fuels. And I was just wondering if there is any moves within Indonesia to look at electrification of some of your ferry routes and vessels.
Yeah, thank you, Ian. As I mentioning in our presentation, hydrogen is one of a new energy to be developed in Indonesia in order to what you call to meet our ultimate goal to go to net zero emission. And compare with the inland transportation, which is they have already had flagship in electric vehicle. In the maritime transportation, we are not trying to also explore the possibility that some transportation, the ship, the vessel can use the hydrogen. Especially, there is some proposal already comes to on my desk. They are trying to develop solar PV combined with this what you call electrolysis, hydrogens, and then batteries. But the problem is since the demand of the hydrogen is still what you call limited in Indonesia, and then we need to also create the market. And if this market already established when, then I believe the hydrogen producing from the what you call while you are producing electricity, and then the other time you're also producing the hydrogen, then the price will be down. And one of that we are now in deep discussion with our colleagues from the Ministry of Transportation is whether the hydrogen can be a fuel in the ferries, and then we can expand it to other vessels later on. And I need to your what you call input and your share experiences, how you are trying to create the what you call the market for the hydrogen, because we believe that hydrogen is not just used for the fuel, but it can be also used in industry, vehicles as well, and so on.
Yeah, thank you. That's a very similar position to we are finding ourselves in. Is getting enough hydrogen to be able to develop a market to bring the price down. So we're in a similar position, but we are trying hard because the ferries are our biggest users of carbon fuel. Thank you for that.
You're welcome. And during the discussion of hydrogen, there is also some discuss that since Indonesia is very abundant with the coal, and we also have a coal-fired power plant that already operation. And there is some discussion that it is possible that hydrogen also can produce from the coal, even though it's still black or gray color hydrogen, but at least it can be emit less emission. And then gradually we can go to blue hydrogen, and then the ultimate goal is, of course, green hydrogen.
Yeah.
Thanks very much, Pak Chris and Ian. We have a couple of minutes left in the discussion. We have a question from one of the participants, Karis from PLN Central. Selamat siang Pak Chris, izin bertanya, kemarin sempat membaca berita bahwa mulai tahun 2030 Bapak Luhut, Menko Maritim, mengatakan akan mulai menghentikan PLTU subcritical sebagai bagian menuju carbon neutral. Apakah roadmap tersebut benar, dan apakah dalam RUPTL 2021-2030 akan mengadopsi penghentian pembangkit PLTU subcritical tersebut?
Ya, terima kasih atas pertanyaannya. Saat ini memang kita sedang menyusun NDC net zero emission Indonesia itu dari sektor energi itu bisa tahun berapa. Sebagaimana tadi saya sampaikan, kesepakatan di antara kita bahwa peaking energinya itu adalah di tahun 2040. Sedangkan net zero emisi dari sektor energi kita perkirakan adalah 2060 dan bisa lebih cepat apabila ada support. Nah, salah satu hal yang menjadi diskusi di dalam melakukan proyeksi terhadap supply and demand adalah terkait dengan PLTU ataupun pembangkit fosil lainnya, PLTU dan PLTG juga. Di dalam kesepakatan yang didiskusikan, Indonesia memang berkomitmen tetap menjaga kontrak yang ada, sehingga PLTU yang sudah memiliki PLTA, sudah memiliki PPA atau kontrak, dan yang sudah dalam tahap konstruksi, maka tetap dilakukan keberlanjutannya, seperti itu. Sedangkan langkah yang diambil yang sedang didiskusikan juga adalah kita mengusulkan untuk phasing out coal sesuai dengan usianya, seperti itu. Dapat dilakukan lebih cepat, tetapi tentu ada konsekuensi yang harus dapat diberikan negara sebagai kompensasi. Dan ini juga sedang dihitung-hitung seberapa besar apabila kita lebih mempercepat penghentian pengoperasian PLTU, maka berapa biaya yang harus disediakan oleh negara untuk memberikan kompensasi atas kebijakan tersebut. Hal yang lain juga adalah kita melihat tentu kita mendorong supaya emisi yang dihasilkan Indonesia juga dapat memenuhi target yang ada, berkontribusi juga dengan negara lain dalam menurunkan emisi, tetapi di satu sisi juga kita mendorong ekonomi rakyat kita juga tumbuh. Jadi kita melihat juga potensi kemungkinan apabila fossil fuel tetap akan dikembangkan, maka harus menggunakan teknologi yang bisa mengabsorb daripada emisi yang dihasilkan. Seperti contoh, apabila kita mempertimbangkan untuk membangun PLTU, maka karbon emit yang dikeluarkan oleh PLT tersebut harus kita simpan dengan menggunakan teknologi CCS ataupun CCUS. Ini pun menjadi salah satu alternatif teknologi yang kita dorong pengembangannya. Demikian jawaban dari kami.
Terima kasih Pak Kris. Thanks very much everybody for the questions and discussion and comments. I think that was our last question and comment taking in for this first topic discussion, but I'm sure if you have any further follow-up comments or questions, please do put it forward through the chat box, and we'll capture that as the day goes, and we could provide some follow-up answers afterwards. Okay, so moving on to the next topic. Thank you, Kevin. So now this marks the beginning of the day one material. So in session one, which is covered today, we will hear 3 topics around UK energy transition journey, island-based energy transition case study, and innovative solutions for island-based energy transition challenges. Next slide, please, Kevin. And the first topic we will hear from Gareth, and it is on UK energy transition journey. Next slide, please, Kevin. In this topic, a few issues will be covered. The first one is around the energy transition trends and key events, but also the second part will touch on the key actors and stakeholders in the UK energy sector. So could I again please all participants that there will be time for discussion after this, but if you would like to put your questions through the chat box, please welcome so as well, both in Bahasa Indonesia or English. Gareth, please, the time is yours.
Thank you very much, Nia, and I will just share my screen with people. And does that look okay?
Yes, that's perfect.
Great. So, first of all, I wanted to just explain where I'm sitting at the moment, because I'm here in the village of Stromness, which is in the north of Scotland, and that is in the north of the UK. So it's a long way away from Indonesia, but if you look at the picture of the village where I sit, yeah, it could be part of Indonesia, perhaps. We'd have to be eastern Indonesia because there's very few trees, but we're beside the sea and you can see it's sunny, which is quite rare. But our office is here in an old school, and you'll hear more about Orkney and its special place in relation to energy over the course of this afternoon and over the coming days. So what I wanted to do is, first of all, think about what is our energy system. And I'm thinking about this from a UK perspective, first of all, and as we go through the training, we'll introduce the transition between the UK experience and the Indonesian experience. And as Alex pointed out in his introduction, this is not always a good news story. The UK has been at energy for a long, long time, and we have some good things to tell, but we've also made some mistakes and had some bad things happen as well. So what we want to do is share with you our full experience, and through that get the opportunity to accelerate not only Indonesia's transition, but to also further accelerate the UK transition. So our energy system includes electricity. This is one of our major originally coal plants in the UK, which, as Alex said, is being phased out now. It's also about transport, and that involves not just electric vehicles, but it involves aircraft and shipping. And the UK is looking actively at decarbonising all of these activities, and this is also happening in the islands of Orkney as well, as you will hear later on. It's also, in the UK, it's about heat. We need heat in the winter time. Increasingly, we need cooling in the summertime, but it's about that thermal regulation of the buildings that we live in and we work in. And that's another important part of our energy system. And then the fourth pillar is really the industrial use of energy. That might be for mechanical work, it might be for processing activities, but it's a major use of energy. So we have these four parts to our energy system. But like any system, it needs a set of mechanisms and processes to enable it to work. And thinking of it as a process, this diagram represents what we believe to be the major parts of an integrated energy system. Now, one of the things that's going to happen over this training course is that we will present some materials that we just don't have time to examine in detail now. But what you can do is access this material and look at it and perhaps adapt it to your own needs in the future. So what this scheme shows is that we have initiating activities, things that allow the system to take place. And on the right-hand side, we have outcomes, which are the products of the system. And we also have agencies and activities that facilitate progress, and then more infrastructure-based enablers at the bottom. But in the core, we have two systems. We have an electrical-based system and a fuel-based system. And sometimes these are referred to as electrons and molecules, as the two sides of the energy system. So it's important to understand that as well as the end use of energy, we have all of these elements that contribute to the integrated delivery of energy. And what we're trying to do is to take CO2 out of that system. So that's the transition part. And that is incredibly difficult technically, but it's also difficult in terms of the organizations and the understanding of the people involved in the energy system. All of us, as I'll come on to later, are part of this transition. So it's not just about systems, it's about processes and people. And that dimension of linking technologies right the way through to customers is something that I feel is really key to the transition that's happening. Because we can't just introduce a machine and expect it to deliver a result. That machine has to be integrated into an energy supply pathway, and it has to be fit for purpose for users to make use of. And so all of these aspects of the energy system need to be thought about. Where the energy is going to come from. How do we deal with the flexibility and the variability in energy inputs? And that flexibility is already required now by our existing systems, not just by renewables. We need to think about how we're going to deliver energy around our systems from place to place. And we need to think about how the different mediums of electricity, transport, heat and cooling are going to link together. In terms of use, we have local direct use of energy, but we also turn energy into everything else that we use in our homes, in our businesses. The food that we produce is a form of energy. And very importantly, and particularly important for Indonesia, is the amount of wealth that comes from exporting energy for use elsewhere. And so when we're thinking about the energy transition, we maybe need to also think not only about internal use of energy in Indonesia, but how that export of energy is going to work in a carbon-free world. Really important is to think about efficiency. If we just waste the use of energy, and at many times in our lives and in our activities we're quite wasteful, that means we're just using energy unnecessarily. So let's be more efficient about it. And we need to think about value for money, and also how we as customers, all of us here today are energy customers. We have a direct input into how energy is used. So it's about you and I thinking about our behavior in the energy system, as well as government and organizations that give energy. So what has happened in the UK over the last 30 years? So these next two diagrams show what's called a Sankey diagram of the type of energy source and the energy use that is in the UK. And this first diagram is in 1992. And what you can see here is that the biggest amount of energy was associated with oil, but also with coal and a little less gas. And that was used for a mixture of activities, including transport and domestic use of energy. If we look forward to 2019, what we can see is that the gas percentage has increased. Coal, as already been said, has almost disappeared. Nuclear has also reduced, but renewables have increased to fill the gap, and oil has also reduced as well. So we've seen this transition, the change in energy sources. In terms of our energy uses, that's basically stayed the same. There hasn't been too much change in the way in which we use energy. So that's the transition that's gone on in the UK so far. But the challenge now is to eradicate the gas and the oil along with the coal. And if we think about how that transition has occurred over time, you can see on this graph how the blue area at the bottom has reduced to almost nothing, and that's the coal contribution. You can see that gas has been particularly important in certain periods. It's slightly reduced now, but it's still a very important buffer. You can also see that nuclear power has somewhat reduced over recent times, and here you can start to see wind and solar becoming more important. And as we go through now each year, this trend continues very steeply. So you can see that that transition hasn't happened overnight. It's not been something that suddenly changed. It's been a gradual transition, but that transition needs to accelerate if we're going to meet our own targets of net zero by 2050. And in terms of how electricity has been progressing, we've got to the point now where around 25% of our electrical demand at a UK level is met by renewables production. So remembering that electricity is not the whole energy system. This ignores transportation use of fuels, and it ignores domestic and industrial use of hydrocarbons as well. So this is just electricity. But within our electrical system, we have different parts of the country and different regions that have performed to a different level. Now that 25% of electricity production, again, we can see here that coal as a source of that energy has reduced markedly over recent years, whereas renewables, for example, here shown in the green line, has steadily increased. But as I said, we have different regional and geographical differences. And here you can see the performance of Scotland. Now in Scotland, we have an abundance of renewable energy. We have windier conditions, and that wind resource is something that has been tapped into. We also have less people, so we have more space for development. And you can see that last year, Scotland got to 97% of its electrical demand coming from renewables. Interestingly, the 2020 target was 100%, so we were 3% off the target, but people see this as a great success. And as you can see, there's a steep gradient, meaning next year and years after, this will continue to increase. So we've had a transition from 20 years ago in 2000, where perhaps around 15% of our electrical system came from renewables, and that was all around hydro. And now we've got to the point where it's almost 100%. And along that journey, we've been told many times that this wouldn't be possible. It's not achievable. And one of the things that we'll be talking about over the coming days is that we have to think of the achievable. We have to think of the possible. We have to make that happen. And if somebody says it's not possible to do something, then we need to think about how can that be changed or altered? What is it that we can do to change the conditions to avoid an obstacle or to get through a barrier? So, as I mentioned already, the UK has committed itself to net zero by 2050. And in the different parts of the UK, there have been other commitments. So in Scotland, the government there, the devolved government, has set a target of net zero by 2045. And when we come to talk about the communities of the UK, we have to understand that we can't, as a country, all get to 2044 and suddenly jump across the line to become net zero. or we can't go to 2049 and jump across the line to net zero at a UK level. So we need individual communities to make that transition sooner. And Orkney is one of the places and one of the communities that said, we want to be first, we want to be early, and so we're looking at a transition by 2030. And the reason we're doing that is that we want to see the economic drivers, the innovation, the opportunities that come through being what's called a first mover on that journey. So there's obviously a cost to this, and it involves a considerable commitment. But interestingly, there's been a figure put on UK transition, which is that it will take £1 trillion to transition the UK from our existing energy system to a decarbonised energy system. So that's a huge amount of money. But actually, a lot of that money would have been spent replacing and updating our energy system as we went along. So the costs that we see for transition are not just against a zero baseline. Our energy system requires investment all the time. What we have to do is to choose to invest in the right activities. And so the journey that the UK is going to go on, in terms of net zero, there is this concept of residual carbon and how that can be offset. I think locally in Orkney, because we have an abundance of renewable resources, we're just heading for just pure decarbonisation. So we're trying to go beyond net zero to actually zero and see if we can make that work. And what we have to do is transform aviation, shipping, other vehicle transport, land use and agriculture, industrial wastes, residential and non-residential buildings, industrial activities, and electrical power generation. So all of these activities will need to be transformed to achieve that net zero target in the UK sense. And what that means in terms of our electrical energy mix is that electricity may become an energy mode of choice. At the moment, electricity is typically around 20, 25, maybe 30% of the energy mix in a particular location. And the other part of the energy system will come from hydrocarbons. But what we're going to see is as electric vehicles come in, as our heating and cooling systems move to electrical sources, our electricity demand is going to increase as our fuel use drops away. So we're going to move from molecules to electrons. Now, the hydrogen discussion we had earlier is about a molecule that maybe is green. If we can create hydrogen from renewable energy, maybe we can still be using molecules without causing climate change. But we foresee that the electrical use in the country is going to increase, and that's going to have to be met by increased renewables capacity. So that is a quick introduction to the UK's energy transition. What I want to talk about next is the key actors and stakeholders in the UK energy sector. And I'm going to maybe take a slightly different perspective and focus on this to what we would typically consider. So the first is to recognize that if you think of who are the stakeholders in energy, it's basically the whole of society, because energy pervades everything that we do in our lives and in our society. So the model of ABCG, academic, business, communities, and government, works, I think, quite well here. And what we need to recognize is that each of those communities and entities are key stakeholders in this energy transition. And what I'd like to do is focus a bit more on the public side of that, on you and I as consumers, because in the end, the energy system is there to give us what we need in our lives. It's there to give us our food, to give us our mobility, to give us the comfort in our homes, and to give us jobs to go to. And so how we as people, how we as citizens of any country in the world see the energy transition is very important. And what we've seen is that there is a change going on as people become more aware of the imperative of the climate emergency that's been declared, and effectively we as individuals are increasingly recognizing that emergency. It's not just a political movement, it's a people-based movement. Now, the issue with people is that they have many different opinions. You can say, ask somebody a question, you can see in the polls, we have different opinion already on just on this training course. So we need to recognize that within our communities, within our countries, within our regions, there's lots of different people with different perspectives. And that perspective is in part related to the lives they live. And so there's pictures here of, these are all communities in the UK, but people's opinions and experiences and challenges will be different in each of these communities. And so within the carbon transition, we need to think about how each of these communities is going to be affected. Some of them may have a high reliance on transport, for example, in our island situation. So transport transition is going to be much more important to us than maybe if you're in an urban setting. There are places that are rural and agricultural based economies. There are others which are industry based economies. So these different places will have different perspectives on what the energy transition means for them. But we need to think about that and think about how we can help take people along and explain to them the imperative, and through that hopefully get their support. And another factor that's associated with that is that it's very easy to believe that public opinion is something that is static and that people's opinions can't be moved. But what this graph shows, and this red line here, is the importance of the environment amongst all of the other activities that people are concerned about in their lives. And what you can see is that the environmental interest and concern has increased rapidly over the last few years as this concept of climate emergency has really taken hold. And so what that shows is that by mobilizing public opinion, it can start to make political decisions easier. In the end, politicians are reacting to us as voters and our priorities. So if we as citizens can say to politicians, climate change is our #1 issue, it'll be much easier for the politicians to be bold in their decision making. What's also interesting about the transition from the old energy systems to the new energy systems is the degree of decentralization that takes place with it. Our old energy systems were very centralized, very based around urban centers. But what renewables does is it allows us to be much more decentralized in our energy system. And we're already seeing that in the UK, that this starts to empower peripheral communities that have maybe been closed off for activities and influence over recent times. So some of the changes we're seeing is the adoption of micro renewables by households, particularly wind and solar. We're seeing an uptake in electric vehicles by people making conscious decisions to make the transition themselves. We're seeing people be more picky about the food that they're buying and thinking about where that food comes from. And we're seeing people think about holidays and travel in terms of their own lives. And also about how the buildings, the houses that they live can be improved in terms of energy efficiency. So this is about people, citizens, making the technological choice themselves within a framework that then is set by government in terms of pricing and tariffs, etc. But the other thing that I think is really interesting over the last 18 months is what we call the COVID effect. So we've all lived through this pandemic. It's been unprecedented in terms of the influences and the change that it's required of us as citizens. But I think what is interesting is that in virtually every country and community around the world, people have been willing, if instructed to, for good reason, to totally change the way they live their lives. And that's really important when we think to the climate emergency, because unfortunately, the climate emergency is even more important and more threatening than COVID. So what we have to be prepared to do is take on the kind of change that we've seen with COVID, but applying it to the climate emergency. And I think the success that we've seen in tackling COVID means that It can give us confidence that that climate emergency, the change we need to decarbonize our systems, is something that we can collectively achieve. So as well as the individual people, there's the governance side of it. And interestingly, in the UK side of things, we don't actually have one integrated governance system for energy. The electricity sector versus the transport sector versus the heat and power sector are regulated and controlled in different ways. We also have the complication of different devolved administrations. So as well as the UK government, we also have the Scottish government, the Welsh Parliament, and the Northern Ireland Parliament, who have different responsibilities, and particularly in relation to planning. We then, at a local authority level and city authorities, have organizations that are responsible for delivering services. And we have the regional development agencies and economic development agencies that can encourage projects through supporting investment. We have a unique organization in the UK called the Crown Estate, which is responsible for the marine resource exploitation. It allocates pieces of the seabed for particular purposes. We have a regulator, Ofgem, which controls the gas and electricity markets, but don't actually control the transport markets. And then we have our grid operators, National Grid, who you'll hear from over the next couple of days, but also other transmission network operators and distribution network operators who are responsible for delivering electricity. But we don't have a similar organization for coordinating transport, distribution of fuels, etc. So these are the levels and the types of organizations that we have in our governance structures. And in the scope of a few minutes today, I can't really go into that in any detail, but there's a table here that explains some of the key roles of some of those organizations. But what has been shown up is that in this transition, in the need to transform our energy system, we need to look at that energy mix, look at the governance structures, look at us as citizens, and think about how do we instigate change. And there are some challenges that are associated with that. And this is some work done by an organization called iGov, which is outlining some of those challenges and thinking about what we need to do. So managing change is in itself a science. We need to be able to challenge conventions, to think about what are the alternatives. We need to mobilize resources and willingness to change. And we need to monitor and measure our performance and think about how that change is happening. So these are the philosophical foundations, if you like, around which change needs to happen. But there's also then a structural reality to that as well. And this is an interpretation of how the UK system looks or could look in terms of facilitating the change. Now, the challenge here is that you can't translate the UK governance system into Indonesia. So this is not an example that we need, but what we want to do is to maybe pick out the things that are working well and drop the things that are not working well and share that experience across to Indonesia. If we've got part of this that's working strongly, let's build on that. If there's something that isn't working well and there are things that don't work well as well, then we don't want to take that into another situation. So when we look across the world and start to collaborate on this response to the climate emergency, that's a key message, is that there's no blueprint which is perfect and universal for everybody to follow. What we need to do is to pick the best bits from wherever they come from and pull them together in the particular context of the country, but also in the region and the community that's being served in terms of that transition. Because in a country like the UK, it's not one solution fits all. And for sure, in a country like Indonesia, again, it's not one solution fits all. We need something that is regionally and community responsive. So that's the end of this first package, looking at the UK transition and what's happened to date, and to start to give you some flavors of what we need to think about. So the takeaways for me is that transition has already started and can go very deeply into old ways of doing energy to bring in new ways of energy. As we go forward, we need to not only think about governance, but we need to think about people. It's you and me that are going to make this transition happen. We might make it practically because of what we do, but also of the expectations that we put on the system. And that's really important to think about as well. So, terima kasih. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Gareth. Bang on time as well. Just before we move on to the discussion and Q&A, again, if I could ask the BG team to kindly please launch the poll for this session, please. Good stuff. Just like before, there's 3 questions here around your opinion and thoughts about certain issues. Would be grateful if everybody could join in and participate in answering those questions. And in the meantime, whilst you're doing that, I see a reminder as well on the chat box, and I'm also going to remind you again to fill in your attendance form, which is needed across the 3 days to generate the completion certificate. So if you could also use the link in the chat box to complete the form, that would be appreciated. Great, so some answers starts to come in. For the first question, menurut pendapat Anda, apakah langkah yang paling tepat untuk mencapai target energi baru dan terbarukan Indonesia? Pilih semua yang sesuai. This is a very good question to look for answers, because it will encourage you to think from your perspective and try to get across what from your area will be the most feasible. But again, you can see how everybody else thinks, so it should gives you an indication of the collective thoughts around the question. At the moment, optimization of the on-grid system seems to have the largest number of people responding to. Then next would be large-scale installations. We have some answering off-grid system utilization, and that's almost tied to the large-scale installations. That's very useful to understand. And on the second question, dalam pekerjaan Anda, di manakah Anda biasanya mencari informasi jika membutuhkan referensi data? Pilih semua yang sesuai. Internal company procedure seems to be the highest preferred answer for colleagues for looking for answers on or data and information for your specific area, and professional forums followed by international network. And the third question is around the responsibility of energy supplier. So, tanggung jawab dari energi supplier adalah untuk membeli listrik dari energi generator dan menjualnya ke konsumen, dan untuk menyediakan listrik termasuk ke kawasan pemukiman dan industri. Large percent, almost all of you agrees to that statement. That's good stuff. We'll give it another few minutes before closing the sequence. We have Team Bahasa Global. Perhaps you can help answer this. Are all the participants able to see the results of the overall poll?
Yes, after we ended the polls.
Okay.
And we could share the results.
Good stuff. We're still waiting for a few more to come in, and then we can share the results. And I know that there are a few questions in the chat box already, so I will try and go through them. But please, if for some reason there's not enough time, or if we need to come back to your questions at a later stage because we have limited time, we will do that at the end of the training program. You'll have a shared document that contains all of the questions, comments, and answers from the 3 days that we are conducting this training. Okay, so I think we've got most of the responses in. Bahasa Global team, Mas Kevin, could you please close the poll and share the results? Right, so we're now sharing the results of what people are viewing, what people are thinking about the most appropriate step in getting the target for new and renewable energy in Indonesia. The largest at the moment, people are thinking about optimizing the grid, on-grid system, followed by almost equally installation large scale and also microgrid and also off-grid. So there's a little, the least number of people, the smallest number of people that have responded to is the small scale array system. It's an interesting distribution of answers, actually. For the second question, the largest number of people that have cited their preference for finding information and data references for an issue or a problem that they encounter would be through scientific publications and peer review, followed through by the internal company procedures, and then professional forum and international network. And most of you agree that the responsibility of the energy suppliers are to purchase electricity from energy generators and sell them to consumers to provide electricity, including to settlements and industry. Okay, good stuff. I'll go through some of the questions in the chat box, and please just drop me another note in the chat box, or please feel free to respond directly through the conversation window. The first one that I noted was a question around UK grid, actually. So is the UK grid interconnected using grid erupt? If it is, how many megawatts are is the connection size, and how much is exported? I don't know, Gareth, do you want to answer that, or is it something more appropriate for colleagues from National Grid, either today or tomorrow?
I don't quite understand the grid erupt part there, but I can speak to the interconnection side. So the grid is I'm going to come onto this in another presentation later on, but it's based around our old traditional energy sources of coal and oil and gas, and that's where our present system is based. But there have been moves to update it to respond to linking in the renewable centers of production over recent times. But
sorry,
this
Gareth, I haven't updated. There's a correction on erupt. It's Europe. It's a typo.
Okay, great. Okay, so that makes much more sense. Yes, so as well as that interconnection within the UK, we have, I think there are 3 or 4 links already made to France and across to Belgium, and there's also links to Ireland and Germany, as well as Norway being planned as well. So there's a number of connections, but interestingly, there's this tension in our energy politics between making connections from southern UK, England to the continent versus making connections through the UK up to northern Scotland. And that's been a constant discussion for the last 20 years about prioritizing connections within the UK before we make connections to other countries. But it's an interesting discussion.
Thanks very much, Gareth. There's another one that came in around how the UK energy transition affect the energy price for customer. How does the UK energy transition affect the energy price for customer, and how does the UK government strategy to manage the affordability for customers?
Yeah. So again, this is right to the heart of political decision making around energy. The UK philosophy has been very much to try and minimize short-term price increases for customers. But the challenge there is that over the medium to long term, it's clear that energy prices will rise if you keep supplying energy from hydrocarbons. So back in the noughties, in the years 2006, 2007, the oil price was rising and the electricity and energy prices were rising, and the incentive for renewables was really strong. when the credit crunch came in 2008, the oil price collapsed, and that meant that the incentive for transition to renewables was reduced. And if you like, the government wobbled in terms of its commitment to renewables and stayed with a short-term energy solution. So energy prices have been really instrumental in driving government opinion. But now, as the oil price is beginning to increase again, we're starting to see an increasing commitment to the transition. There have been other organizations and pressures who, during that journey, have been willing to stay a bit more consistently committed to renewables. But it's absolutely true that the price incentive is important to customers, but it's also important to understand that in our energy consumption, we as individuals make lots of choices about the price at which we consume energy. And so we need to give people the information and the understanding so that they can make good choices. And we also need to recognize that particularly there's people on low incomes who may have less choice about how and what energy they make use of. So we need to have some mechanisms to support people on lower incomes make good choices or provide them with good systems.
Thanks, Gareth, for that. I'll go to this question first. Okay, seeing that most renewable energy resources are generated in the northern part, Scotland area, while the biggest demand seems to be in the southern end, England, did UK ever face any problems due to the long distance between supply and demand area?
So the problem came from the mechanism. So what we have is a place-sensitive mechanism. So as you get further north in the UK, you have to pay more to access the grid. So if you're generating wind in Scotland, you'll pay for the privilege of transporting it all the way down through to England. If you're generating wind in England, you might even get paid to put it on the grid because that's where the demand is. So that system has some logic to it, but the price points that have been used to create that incentive haven't been matched by the capacity to deliver. So there's so little room in south of England that you can't have much more generation there. So you actually need the generation to be up in the north of Scotland or in the islands. So that's still a problem that is not resolved today. And it's been a big hurdle in the increasing capacity in some of the more resource-rich areas. So yeah, it's a real issue.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Gareth. So we have a couple of minutes left, so I'll take the last question from the chat box. And like I've said before, those whose questions are not answered yet at this moment, we'll capture them and collate them into a document, and we can circulate the answers from the speakers and the collective opinions from the organizers later on in the process after the session's finished. This last question, Gareth, is for you. So how did the UK government, how can the UK government manage energy transition from fossil fuel energy to renewable energy so that it can be smoothly adopted to the system?
If we had the magic answer, it would be fantastic. The simple answer is that it's not easy, and it's not one solution. It needs concerted efforts over decades. That means it's probably multiple governments which have to adopt coherent strategies. So one of the reasons that Scotland has made so much progress is that there was actual political alignment between all of the parties in Scotland about what was needed. And so energy didn't become a political football. That was less so in the UK government system. So the continuity of purpose is really important because that then drives investment. It gives people assurance that if they commit to a particular part of the energy transition, then it isn't going to suddenly change. I think the other piece is that I mentioned public opinion, and there's political opinion as well. And we need to make sure that people have the right information in front of them. And the recent recognition of the climate emergency has, and actually living through COVID, has shown people that there is a crisis in the world. And COVID is in many ways linked to climate change, and we need to think about how we're going to manage ourselves. So there's probably a stronger commitment now than there was pre-COVID, but we've still got quite a long way to go. And one of the things we have to recognize is that for sometimes good reason, sometimes bad reason, there is an incumbent energy system, and there's inertia within that system, because change will mean people losing their opportunities, losing the privilege that they have, and losing jobs that they have. And so we need to ensure that the transition creates new opportunities, new wealth, new jobs to help that transition go forward. So it isn't easy, and it needs many different parts to make that transition work.
Thanks very much, Gareth, for that very comprehensive answer. And I'm sure in the next sessions today, and also the follow-on session tomorrow and the third day, we'll start to give some either technical, socioeconomic examples of how these have gone through in the UK, and some of the points which you covered just now, Gareth, to give some indications of how we did it here and what potential relevance that might bring to the Indonesian situations. So, okay, so I think we are going to have to move to the next topic. Thank you, everybody, for your questions and comments. Now, the next slide, please, Mas Kevin. That's great. So we're entering the second topic, which is island-based energy transition case study, and this will be delivered jointly by Gareth and Mark. So next slide, please. This topic will cover three groupings of issues. The first one is the Orkney story and some examples around what the Orkney has gone through. And the second group of issues will be around the challenges in renewable energy production, distribution, and integration. And finally, we will look at how to reflect those examples into Indonesia's unique situations. So again, like previously done, please write your questions both in English or Bahasa Indonesia in the chat box, and we can go through them during the discussions, or if you prefer, you could ask them directly during the discussion forum too. Okay, I'll hand over to Gareth, I think, before Mark for this session.
Thanks, Nia. Yeah. Okay, so I'm just going to get this going. Okay, you see that slide now, yes?
Yes.
So what I'm now going to talk about is a little bit about Orkney, and then finish on a bit more about the UK grid. So you now know where the Orkney Islands are off the UK. And these islands are ancient islands. They have a civilization going back over 5,000 years. And we've still got relics of that time, which we can go and visit. And those people were very innovative people back in the Neolithic. And so we like to think of these islands as inspired by innovation, but they're also very beautiful in terms of their landscapes as well. And over the last 2 decades, 3 decades, they've become very modern islands in terms of energy. And what you're going to hear about over the next few hours are some of the initiatives that are underway and have been undertaken across many different energy spheres. So Orkney is a population of about 22,000 people across 17 islands. So it's a small archipelago, not nearly the scale of Indonesia, but perhaps an interesting model. It has some of the world's most productive renewable resources. So we have very strong winds, large waves, and strongly flowing tides. But we also are surrounded by hydrocarbon reserves. So there's an oil terminal on the islands, and so we've been able to be in that energy mix and the energy transition for many decades. We're also at a maritime crossroads of and in the Northern Hemisphere, we have the largest harbour, Scapa Flow, which is this area of water in the middle of Orkney, is the largest harbour in the Northern Hemisphere. And we also have a cluster of centres of excellence. We have over 400 people working in Orkney on renewable energy related projects, but we also have other areas of endeavour where these islands are particularly good. We have some very good food and drink brands, including a well-known whiskey, Highland Park, but we're also a major tourism destination as well. And actually we come out as being one of the happiest and most sustainable communities. There's surveys that get done regularly, and Orkney usually comes out near the top. So it's a great place to live, which those of us that are lucky enough to be here can claim. And we also have an amazing ecological diversity and environmental quality. And so the ambition to live to the needs and the aspirations of the Sustainable Development Goals are really strong here. And it's not just about doing that locally, it's about sharing that with other island communities and other communities. So because we're this archipelago, we're a bit like the UK, which is an archipelago of nations and islands. And we're like a mini UK, but actually given the scale of Indonesia, we're like an absolutely micro tiny Indonesia with our 17 islands rather than the 17,000 islands. But what that archipelago nature means is that we have to think about energy in a different way to being a mainland situation. So we have to think about onshore and offshore infrastructure. We have a mixture of resources. Transport in terms of air transport, shipping transport is as important as vehicle transport. And you'll see that through the presentations. Now, a bit like the Sankey diagram I showed for the UK, we've done a Sankey diagram on the basis of an energy audit for Orkney. And what you can see here is that our buildings and our use of electricity accounts for a rather small proportion of our energy mix, which is dominated by transport and vehicle-based activities and ship-based activities. And that's particularly because of being an island location. Our ferries and our fishing fleets and the workboats contribute a large amount to our energy demand. But what we're really proud of in Orkney is that since 2013, so for the last 7 years, we've generated the equivalent of over 100% of our electricity demand from renewable energy. So you may remember in the last presentation, the UK is at 25%, Scotland is at 97%, but Orkney has been over 100% since 2013. And we were one of the first communities to make that transition to 100% renewables in the UK. And because of that, we've had experience of what that means, the benefits that come with it, but also some of the challenges that come with it. And part of the journey hasn't just been around the technology, it's been about the organizational structure. You can't make that kind of transition without having the right kind of structures in place. And what that means is it has to be led by vision. You need people in the community or in the region or in the country who see the future and can help take people there. You need a strategy to back up that vision and then the organization to deliver that strategy. And that movement needs to involve all the different parts of the community, the industry, the social side, the governance side. And of course, that needs to then lead to action. You don't achieve this without actually taking things forward, making things happen, and making change. And we then need support mechanisms. There are some difficult steps to take, and you need a little bit of capital, you need a little bit of investment, you need a little bit of encouragement to help make those first steps stick. And part of Orkney's success isn't just about the resources, it's not just about the people, it's not just about the technology, it's also about the organizational structure as well. And as well as that, we've also been able to plan possible outcomes using tools that are available within our community. So I mentioned about the 400 people that work in the renewable sector, and we have about 100 people who work as strategic planners and environmental advisors. And so within a community, we have the ability to think about possible futures, to map out possible alternatives, and to see how they could best fit together. And there's some examples here of some work that looked at tidal energy, wave energy, the connecting cables and the substations that are needed to link them. And this kind of analysis is needed within our energy system to deliver the best solutions. So why are we doing this? We're doing this because we want to generate energy. And in this red circle here around Orkney, there's enough energy production there that can give between 20 and 50% of total UK energy, not just electricity, but that area can be generating 50% of our decarbonised energy supply. So to reach that, we need these grid options. And as the question asked about how do we best provide that grid? So we have a situation where we're dealing with this archipelagic situation. We've got islands, and that's different from a more traditional continental situation where, frankly, grid connections are easier. So we have to optimize our energy system, and looking forward, it's not just optimizing it for electrical use, it's optimizing it for transport and industrial use as well. So there's two structures that we use. We've got overhead lines and subsea cables. The transmission level lines look like this in the UK. They're not particularly beautiful structures, and they're controversial in themselves. So subsea systems can often be an advantage because they're not seen on the landscape, but they're obviously more expensive. So what we've had to do is to think about how we're going to link areas which traditionally in the first area of energy development, we were linking coal-rich areas, which are shown by these red dots. This is where our energy sources came from. When we found oil offshore, we started linking in our second era, particularly through a gas network from the northern, central, and southern North Sea. But looking forward, we need the third era of renewables, and that's predominantly going to come from marine assets. So what we're looking at now is how do we develop this? Do we take a radial approach? Do we take a parallel pattern with an in series or in parallel pattern, or do we go for a multinodal approach where we have subsystems? And each of these could work. It's then looking at what are the optimal configurations for the whole of the UK or for parts of the system going forward. So what I'd like to do now is to hand over to my colleague Mark Hull, who's going to talk a bit more detail about the elements in Orkney. And I'm sorry, Mark, to take 2 or 3 minutes of your time, but I hope Nia will give you the 2 or 3 minutes back.
No worries, Gareth and Mark. Just it's fine. We have time.
Cheers. I'm just going to try and share my screen now. I think. So hopefully now you're seeing my presentation.
Yep.
Give me a second. No, thank you, Gareth. Yes, I mean, it's a perfect link in to what I will talk about in Orkney. Yeah, so first of all, yeah, like Gareth, I'm also sitting in Orkney. I'm fortunate to be sitting in Orkney. My organisation and role, we work across Scotland and Europe and Sub-Saharan Africa, and now recently in Eastern Indonesia with Nia and Henny on a project looking at financing community renewables. But we're fortunate to be based in Orkney, and this is very much using Orkney as an example. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, and as I say, I'm working at Heriot-Watt University. It's using Orkney as an example to illustrate on the topic the challenges in renewable energy production and integration, because Orkney's had to face those challenges early and earlier than others. But from that, we've both got learning and we have something to pass on from that point of view. So looking at Orkney community energy and the smart grid, specifically the smart grid, because there's a number of things we can look at in topics, but how we've worked with the smart grid, taking energy. As Gareth saying, Orkney is almost like the UK written in small, and even as you say, Indonesia written in very small. Orkney has a phenomenal resource. I mean, even just in renewable resources, and not the hydrocarbons, we estimate over a gigawatt of potential around and in our waters and around our islands. But we only have a demand of about 35 megawatts. There's a huge imbalance. We have to do something with this energy, take this energy somewhere. And we've already got over 40 megawatts of existing onshore wind connected. So we've already needed a smart grid, and we needed a smart grid about 20 years ago. So what is Orkney smart grid from that point of view? This is a map of the archipelago of Orkney, as Gareth said. The blue line is our equivalent to transmission. It's our 33 kV, 33,000 volt main system connecting all the islands. And there's nodes in there, which are the substations from that point of view. And it's exactly the same as a UK grid or to some degree parts of Indonesia. And the interesting thing, again, they're not shown on here, is the generation for that grid is all lying in the outer islands on here. So it's the same challenges that we're facing and balancing and distributing that energy. And Orkney's grid was full back in 2003. As far as the national standards and regulations were required, it became full for our normal firm connections in 2003. And this was because with that extra generation, they have to guarantee that you will receive your energy and be able to export it. And we were limited going out of Orkney, where they had to say, had to guarantee 20 megawatts on one of that. And if one of those cables to the mainland at the bottom there failed, then they wouldn't be able to take the energy. So that would the grid closed. But nationally, and we have National Grid and Duncan on the call as well, which is great. We're able to do some innovation where we looked at modifying the code and developed the first time these new non-firm intertrip connections, which basically means generators could connect, but if one of those cables down here failed, then you would be switched off. That was great. That immediately created 20 megawatts of new capacity, just like that. The problem was it also went almost as quickly. It went within 2 years as people applied because of the phenomenal resource we've got. So at that point, they looked again and created a new thing, which is the first smart grid, which is the smart grid for generators, where they changed the rules again, where they looked at the whole of the grid and they identified areas that local pinch points, not just the cables going across to the Scottish mainland. They also looked to see how the different areas in Orkney and where the weaknesses were, where the bottlenecks were, and then they would actively manage it based on that. And that's been a reasonable success. It's created another 35 megawatts of generation already. Quick principle how it works, because we only have the 10 minutes. But basically, you have the smart grid zones, and you'll see these are surrounding some of the islands, and they reflect areas where there's a known pinch point. So on the graph here, you can see zone 1 and the measuring point 3, for instance. There, they're measuring the amount of current flowing through cables. It can't get too much, or the cables droop too much. But if it gets too much, they will actually modify and turn down the generators that are connected in that zone. But more on that to come. For example, here's Rousey as one of the community turbines, a standard turbine for Orkney. You have a 900 kilowatt turbine on one island. It's exporting energy into the grid, and it comes to the measuring point 3 where it measures it. When the current gets too much and the cables get too hot, the turbine is turned down or off. As simple as that. That's how it's actively managed. That allows generators to connect at an affordable price rather than paying for full reinforcement, maybe all the way down to Edinburgh. But equally, but then also is limited on what access you have. And that was a great success in the first trial of doing this nationally and to some degree internationally. The challenges that came from that was that we had to estimate how much those turbines would be turned off. And at the national level, the estimates were lower than what we saw in reality. So people built these turbines expecting between 3 and 20%, but quite quickly, as the success of the generation in Orkney grew, the outer zones were curtailed by as much as 2/3 of their production. And this started to have a sort of overall loss of larger than 4 million income opportunity for different generators, and individual losses of projects of between 150 and 350,000, which started to threaten their financial viability. So we needed to do something about that. This is really illustrated by one of the community turbines, where they talked about the iceberg graph, that they had the idea of putting what production they produced every month above the line, but they showed what they were missing out on below the line. And it became significant that sometimes, like an iceberg, it was bigger down below than above. Another one here, and it got progressively worse. In 2012, Shaughnessy had no curtailment. They had more in 2013, more in 2014. And by 2014, there was $250,000 to that turbine itself was lost in finance. And that's really serious. So they closed the grid for connections from September 2012, and there was no more new connections at that point. So then we looked at how we could address this challenge, and working with the grid operator to improve existing connection management, and work with them, the national governments like yourselves and other users and local to see how we can do different things like seasonal line rating and local reinforcement, and urge long-term investment, but that wasn't going to be an immediate answer. Given an immediate crisis, we tried to see what we could do ourselves. And this led to more than a decade now of high levels of innovation in Orkney, driven out of necessity more than anything else. And there's three areas we would normally consider. You have renewable control, linked to storage like hydrogen, like Chris mentioned, and the local matching of generation and demand, which I'll use a small example of to illustrate it to you for the smart grid, and wider grid services, which are now coming on it. But I won't touch on that, but others will probably over the next few days. So the first ones, we have things like the Renewable Power Zone, we have the Community Energy Scotland Surf and Turf project and Big Hit, where we're using hydrogen as storage. As I say, some of the, I think Ian will come out, we'll talk a bit more about that, we won't be able to cover it here. What I'll focus on is this local matching of generation and demand. The main project was Heat Smart Orkney that we've been led on, and that's led to new projects like Reflex and Trader, which John Thulis will talk about later in the week. So quickly, we're taking that second subject there, linking demand to the grid, on the grid to production and curtailment. So it's matching generation with and using technology and contractually, financially, a way of doing that. Going back to that grid I illustrated before, you take the Rousey turbine again, it's producing away, being measured at measuring point 3. When it becomes an alarm state, it goes to be switched off. What we did in simplicity is we looked at the houses that were connected to that grid, and we either put in devices or made those devices smart so they could soak up that energy when it was being measured. By soaking it up locally, it removed the problem and turned the turbine back on. It's simple in itself, but for it to work, it needs to stack up economically. And to do that, you have to help one turbine against another turbine, and then it stacks up. This project has been running for quite a few years now, and this is actually a live, not live, but a screen grab of a live feed, where without going into too much detail, you have all the devices across the islands. When you get the green lines, the curtailment in events, heating's being turned on, water's being heated up, which is relieving the problem and solving the problem. It's really straightforward. But out of doing that here, when we faced a local problem, this created what we became known nationally really as flexibility. And this is value in smart end user energy use, what we call flexibility. Originally, traditionally, you have generators and grid supplies, and they supply it directly to your sources. Domestically, that's heating, hot water, power in a household. The secret to flexibility was breaking the link between the input and output. And by doing that, you can do that with storage, control of that storage and devices, and communication on your system and with those two sides of the system. And this creates a flexibility that creates value. It can often grid services, you can use more on side, avoid peak import. In a household, you can optimize system, reduce losses, and loads manage. All these are value that make it worthwhile doing. And the beauty of it now, we're at a stage where these can be domestic, and these can be things that are commercially available, technology that everyone is using in their houses are now starting to adopt, like electric vehicles. And that's really the key to an example of how we've taken and used the smart grid and now made the demand side of the grid smart to match up what we were facing, a challenge that came from making the generation side smart. The Reflex Orkney project, John will talk on more, but it's built on that and is now trying to do that at an Orkney-wide scale and across all the different modalities of power, transport and heat, and we're working together on that. And really to wrap up my presentation, that was it. It's really to echo a lot of what has been said by Chris and by Gareth as well. I have a thing where we're trying to solve problems, and I learned a long time ago the difference between equity and equality. And equity is making the solution fit the question. I always just love that really simple illustration of that. We can all have a box, but if you use the box correctly, everyone can benefit. We're always searching for liberation, where we remove the barriers, we take down the fences, and we have to work long term to do that. But most importantly, especially in places like Orkney, and what the challenges we face with grids and in places like Indonesia, is inclusion, where the best solution comes if the spectators become part of the game and can also build and make part of the problem. And that is me. Thank you, Nia.
Thanks very much, Mark. Really appreciated those examples and lived-in experience of that journey. So, Gareth, is it back to you just now?
It is, Nia, yes. Just wait for the... Okay. So what we wanted to do is to just start to reflect a little bit on what are the lessons that might be appropriate to pull into the Indonesian context. And we're going to be kind of mixing between Indonesia and Orkney over the remaining part of this session and into what Ian and Gaynor are going to speak about later on. So reflecting on the situation in Indonesia, Indonesia is a huge country, and the areas of urban demand are shown here through a kind of population density map. And you've got Java at the core with Jakarta there, beaming red at us, saying this is where people are living. You've then got Sumatra with a mixture of less populated areas, but areas of intense population. The large islands of Kalimantan and Sulawesi, again, with a mixture of urban hotspots, but large areas that are either not populated or very sparsely populated. And then we get into eastern Indonesia, where the population levels drop off considerably. So there's an incredible variety of places there. And not surprisingly, the existing grid context reflects that. So there's areas of grid development, there's integrated grids, particularly around Java, Bali, and there and into Lombok, but also there's isolated parts of the grid in the other islands. Now there's plans obviously to build links between those, but there are still going to be islands that are never going to be connected to the grid, not because it's impossible, but it's going to be too expensive, and it's probably in the end not the best solution for them. Grid comes at a cost, and it may be better to invest now in smart things like storage. Some of the solutions that Mark was talking about are allowing us to look at storage options as well as grid connected options, and to make a choice about how it might be best to connect different communities, different industrial sites to their energy sources. And the other thing to remember is that our existing grid systems are basically constructed on the basis of hydrocarbon-based fuels. So they link customers to power stations that are using coal or oil or gas largely for their energy supply. But if we move to a renewable state, then the distribution of generation sites can increase hugely. In Orkney, when we started off on our energy journey, we had just one grid connection to Scotland, which all of the electricity came down. We now have probably 1,000 electrical generators in Orkney, all contributing to that mix. So we've gone from 1 to 1,000. You can imagine what's going to happen in Indonesia with that explosion of renewable capacity. But that creates opportunities. It's not just a challenge. And one of the other things to think about, and we'll come back to this diagram a number of times, is the distribution of energy resources across Indonesia. So there's an incredible mix and diversity of onshore resources, of marine resources or blue energy. And at the moment, a lot of the focus, quite rightly, has been on taking the proven technologies. So onshore wind, hydro, geothermal, and onshore solar. But I think it was really encouraging to see in Pak Chris's presentation that Indonesia is recognizing that, for example, floating solar on reservoirs and lakes may be an even more important resource because of the availability of these sites and the fact that many of them are associated with hydro plants which are already developed. And if we just take that a step further and think about the blue energy resources, the resources on the sea, I think the scale of those resources increases even more. And we're going to be talking more about that in the third day of this training course. So thinking there about floating solar resources on the sea as well as on lakes and reservoirs, thinking about tidal resources and wave resources, and actually also offshore wind resources as well. So each of these resources and each of the markets that they serve is then going to lead to a strategy, if you like, of linking resource to demand. And that strategy might be different in different parts of Indonesia. So there are clearly areas like Java where energy is going to need to be pulled in from areas to create the critical mass of energy that's required. But there are other parts of Indonesia that might be quite happy being self-sufficient, providing their own energy resources for their own needs. And there's also one important thing to think about, again, in relation to energy, is that most of the energy that's produced at the moment in Indonesia as oil and coal is exported. And so to maintain that economic stimulus to the economy, it's going to be appropriate perhaps for Indonesia to think about how it could be exporting renewable energy. And one of those areas may be across to the Malay Peninsula from Sumatra. So as we've seen, as well as off-grid solutions, grid connectivity is going to be important. And that relationship between islands and generation and demand and the connectivity of those versus the use of storage is something that we're going to particularly delve into tomorrow. But as Ian goes through some of the technologies, you'll see some of the solutions that might be appropriate for that. And one thing just to leave you with, so often we talk about an archipelago and thinking about the individuality of islands, we can also think about the connectivity of islands. And there's just an illustration here of, if you like, an optimal cable route. If Indonesia was ever going to have a cable that went from Aceh to West Papua, this is a possible configuration of where it could go to link all of those places along the way. So looking forward, there's clearly huge challenges to achieve decarbonisation, but we're starting to see that there's a mixture of strategies, of resources, of connectivity options that can help us deliver those. And so as we go into the consideration of the technologies in the next session, it's important to think that none of these is the perfect solution for everywhere, but many of them can be applied somewhere in Indonesia. Terima kasih.
Thank you very much, Gareth and Mark. I'm hoping that we would have some more time later on, either through this introductory session or in the advanced training session designed to actually go into a bit more details of all of these different problems that have come up and the challenges, and how Orkney's lived-in experience can show some of the potential pathways to overcome and see which ones might be applicable to be adopted or adapted through Indonesian system. Bahasa Global team, could you please launch the polls for us? We'll take a few minutes to fill this in as before. And just another reminder for participants to fill in your attendance sheet online as the link is provided. And whilst we're filling in this poll, if you have other comments and questions for both Mark and Gareth for this last topic, please do send them in or just raise your hand and make yourself known. You could speak directly and have a discussion with both Mark and Gareth, who I'm sure be able to and very, very excited to be able to share what's been happening. Okay, so the three questions that are here. The first one is around if everybody can spot the similarities between Scottish Islands and Indonesian islands. And the second question is around your thoughts of the different transmission systems, whether overhead lines or subsea cable would be the most appropriate, or the potentially have a better benefit than the other. And the third one is around how Orkney has overcome the distribution, its energy distribution challenges. Okay, I'll give it another minute to see. So most of you at the moment answered that geographical features are the main similarities between Scotland and Indonesia. And it's also then followed by planning. And the second question around overhead lines, most of you agree that actually it's 50-50 at the moment. 50% of you agree that the overhead lines for on land transmission will be more expensive, although the design will have better protection than the subsea cable. On the third question, how does Orkney overcome its distribution energy challenges? At the moment, I could see that short-term investment push is 50% of you is currently answering that question, and then the other one looking at what the community can do independently. Maybe it's a good time to close the poll. Masa Global, please, Mas Kevin. There we go. So yes, that's an interesting spread, actually. I thought Gareth has mentioned it a bit around the overhead lines and also subsea cable. So that's a good take on that. And also Mark's sessions on how to overcome the energy distribution challenge. Okay, right. Can I take the first questions or comments from participants, perhaps, on this topic? Let me see if we have some.
Question, yeah, in the
chat.
chat.
If I may, just
yes.
want to give this information because 5 minutes from now, I need to join to another meeting with our Director General. So Gareth, thank you so much, and Lutz, for the nice presentation. For your last presentation related to the what you call the possibility the Indonesia to making the interconnection system inter the island. Actually, this is also under our planning, because you know we already seen that some part of the Indonesia have a very abundant of a potential of renewable energy. For example, in North Kalimantan, we have a very abundant hydro potential. The capacity can be developed is a very huge, but in terms of the demand, most likely the demand is of electricity concentrated in Jawa Bali electricity system. Then we have an idea to making the interconnection between Kalimantan and Jawa Bali island. And the other side, we also already identification that the huge potential of the solar PV development in Sumba Island. It is most likely in the Nusa Tenggara. But once again, the demand is not so big enough. Then actually we have some joint study to make it the possibility to expedite this potential and trying to export the electricity into Jawa Bali system using the submarine cable, HVDC 500 kV. And there is also, just recently, there is some discussion with our colleagues from the ITB. ITB is Bandung National Institute with the minister and the Directorate General. There is some idea to having some we call Nusantara grid, meaning that all 5 main islands will be interconnected, and then in the later on there is some what you call transfers energy based on the existing potential energy exists in that island. So I think I need having some more deeply discussion with you about the challenges, and then whether the what you call the interconnection is the best suitable for Indonesia, or just some experts say that the distributed generation, meaning that decentralization is also one of the options in maintaining the electricity supply in some systems. So of course we need to have some discussion later on. But anyway, your presentation is very insightful. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think we are all seeing that there is a tremendous potential for harnessing the renewable energy potential for Indonesia, and this idea now of interconnection, building in storage capacity, and the phasing out of the old technologies. It's very encouraging in terms of the carbon transition. So congratulations on moving this agenda forward so progressively.
Terima kasih, Pak Chris. Thanks, Gareth, for that as well. I was hoping that I've captured some questions in the chat box. Maybe our translator from Bahasa Global could help whilst I read it in Indonesian. You could help translate it in English for our speakers. So this question is directed to Mark and Gareth. If you need the Indonesian translation, could you maybe press on the interpretation feature, please? Okay. Bagaimana bisnis proses penyediaan tenaga listrik di UK maupun Orkney dilaksanakan? Apakah antara penyedia pembangkit dan transmisi merupakan entitas yang berbeda? Dan bagaimana pemerintah UK menjamin ketersediaan energi bagi rakyatnya? Did you get that, both Gareth and Mark? Should I repeat the question again?
Thank you very much.
Okay. I'll read it once more then.
No, it's okay.
Bagaimana?
No,
You
it's
okay?
cool. It's okay. Yeah. Who's going to go first? Gareth.
Mark goes first. We've been listening to Gareth.
Yeah, Mark, you go first.
Yeah. No, I think it's quite interesting in the UK, quite different from a lot of Europe, where we saw deregulation of the system earlier on. So we have it a lot more at arm's length from the government, so that the separate elements of production, transmission and distribution of the electricity, and then sales to the customer are in different elements and different sectors, and they're not integrated. So there's a market, but they rely heavily on both regulation, guidance, and market forces to satisfy those things. So there's elements of the industry which is protected and regulated, and we have National Grid here, and we have the organization called Ofgem, which provides that regulation and things that you have to do to maintain standards of safety, where things cannot be competitive because only one person can own a cable and things like this, to make sure that that is done fairly. So it's a combination of the two, really, but it's an unbundled system in the UK, which is probably ahead of the rest of Europe in lots of ways. Is my first answer. Gareth?
Yeah, I think that if you look at the generation side, is much more diverse in terms of the participants than the distribution and delivery. And in different geographies, we're seeing maybe different responsiveness of the grid and energy supply system to those opportunities. And where people are being progressive and offering new solutions, then the incumbents, if you like, are maintaining their license to operate. But where the incumbent is maybe being less progressive, other people are starting to try and offer a service that allows for this transition to happen. So I think that you will see more freedom to operate in the future as we go forward, because I think one of the lessons is probably that new operators come with new ideas which can help the transition move faster. The existing system has a lot of inertia in it.
Yeah, I agree. We often use the term disruptors in the UK, and I feel quite bad because I get called a disruptor the whole time, because we're making a bit of a headache for people who originally used to rely on one large coal-powered power station, and they're now having to deal with, as Gareth says, maybe 100 different generators. But there's large advantages that come from that, and the grid operators, the energy handlers and sellers recognise that, and they're fairly well bought into that. But we're having to catch up and rewrite the rule books to do that. But yeah, no, I think that's true.
Great stuff. Thank you both. We have a few minutes left, so I'm going to take two questions, I think. So I'm going to read the first one, which is in Indonesian, and then go to the second one, which is given in English. So for the second question for this topic would be to both you, Mark and Gareth. Melihat kondisi Indonesia saat ini, apakah yang perlu dilakukan dalam jangka pendek maupun menengah untuk penyediaan energi terbarukan di Indonesia? Apakah pembangunan grid terlebih dahulu atau pembangkit energi baru terbarukan dengan mini grid? Please. Gareth, do you want to make a start on this one?
Yeah, I think my short answer is you have to do everything. This is an emergency. We have little time, and the more progress we can make, the better. I think I've noticed even in the last few years, and my comments to Pat Chris were reflecting this, is that I think Indonesia has gone from a stage of saying, we understand that renewable energy is something for the future, but we're not quite there yet, to now having a number of initiatives which are the first steps in many different areas. And what we've seen, not just in the UK, but in other parts of the world, is that once this transition starts, it gathers its own momentum, because the inertia that we have of never having done it is very different to the challenge of saying we've done it once or twice, now let's repeat it 10, 100, 1,000 times. So yeah, I think you can't choose. We don't have the luxury of choosing big versus small. We have to do all of it at the same time, and it's different people. It's not all one person, one job that's going to be doing all of this, other than maybe the minister who's in charge of it. But everybody else, there's different people playing different roles in this energy system. And so in an isolated community, it might be an individual shopkeeper or a boat owner or a car operator, somebody making an individual decision. It may be somebody running a huge business or an enterprise, but all of these people need to make the contribution and to commit to the transition.
Mark, do you want to come in? Or does that cover it all?
Yeah, no, completely. No, I think it is. I think, as Gareth hit the nail on the head, and that little slide I put up at the end about the different boxes, it's not going to be one solution.
I love that.
We need to, we need to be ensuring we've got factories that are supplied reliably in your major cities, on your major islands, but we also need to make sure that we have a standard of health, wealth, and well-being on a small eastern Indonesian island, and they're quite different answers and different questions. Sorry, that feels like a politician's answer, but it's the real answer.
That's brilliant. Thanks so much, both. So the last question for your topic is, again, for either one of you or both. Is Brexit going to affect the North Sea's offshore renewables mega project on wind power, while those mega projects are keys for achieving the UK's decarbonisation ambitions?
Yeah, to be honest, I don't think so. I mean, I'll put my hand up and say I didn't want Brexit. I think it was the wrong thing to do, but we have it now. So, but to be honest, these big mega projects are going to happen. They're needed. They go beyond the petty politics of whether we're in the EU or not. So this is the case where climate change is actually more important than politics, and people need to get over it. And who knows what might happen in the future in terms of our relationship with Europe. I think there are other issues going on in the UK. We've got probably a Scottish independence referendum that we had back in 2014, and we may have another one soon. That's going to be an interesting dynamic to consider. But again, it doesn't matter what the political solution is. We need renewable energy to be produced and then shared with people. And we're already seeing through the interconnectors that the UK is sharing energy with Europe, actually in preference to sharing it with its own population. So it's obvious that Europe isn't a barrier, or Brexit isn't a barrier to the UK choosing to work with its European partners. So I think this, I don't think it's going to be a major hurdle.
Good stuff. Thank you so much for that. We're running a little bit over time, so I'm just going to go straight to the next topic. If you could pull up the next slide, please, Kevin. So the third topic and the last topic of today, can I see the next slide, please, Kevin? Is on the innovative solutions for island-based energy transition challenges, and that will be jointly delivered by Ian and Gaynor. Next slide, please. And some of the issues covered will be around the ongoing innovations and the opportunities for Indonesia, as well as the second group of issues will be around sustainability solutions for island-based transition challenges, including sustainability practices and some case studies from Indonesian communities. So Gaynor and Ian, please, the time is yours. As before, please feel free to write your comments and questions in the chat box, or we could go through them during the discussions as well. Please, Ian.
Thank you, Nia, for that introduction. Can we go to the first slide, please? So it's just a repetition of what Nia has just shown us. So I'm going to focus a little bit on energy systems, hydrogen, and some other options that we've been working on in Orkney. And to try and get a bit of context around that, both Mark and Gareth have highlighted some of the challenges that we've had in Orkney of being able to introduce a large amount of renewables onto a system that was never really designed for that same issue. And Mark has talked about some of the technical issues that they've faced with it. And I'm going to talk a wee bit about storage within the Reflex project and storage around hydrogen and some other options beyond that if we have time. So if we could have the next slide, please. This was really to start giving some context, and I think both Pat Harris and Gareth have kind of covered most of the information on this slide. So if we could move on to the next slide, please. So Gareth presented this slide, and apologies for the same slide coming up again. But what I wanted to say around this slide is, and I think Gareth did start highlighting that the energy system that we're having to deal with is extremely complicated, and there's a large amount of actors. And within Orkney, for us to be able to deliver a new energy system or demonstrate an energy system within our island, we had to take account of all these. Now that, to a certain extent, in a small island, in some respects, that's easier, particularly when you look along the bottom row that talks about local involvement, local benefit, local content. All of these things in a relatively small island area are sometimes much easier to deal with, whereas where it gets more complicated is when we're in a small island having to deal with national projects. And Gareth has just shown us what Indonesia wants to try and do or needs to try and do on a national basis. But what we try to do in Orkney, and we've been facing for a number of years, is trying to deal with national systems to improve them so that we can get more access to the grid. So if we could move on to the next slide, please. So our most recent solution, our most recent project, which both Gareth and Mark have mentioned, is the Reflex project, which is a project that, although we've been working on it now for maybe the last couple of years as a specifically defined project, is a project that's been built up from probably more than 10 years of work on that same energy system that I just had in the previous slide. So it's around looking at an energy system for the future. And I think the work that we've been doing, and we've highlighting Orkney as a demonstration place, and this is a demonstration project that's been part funded by the UK government to deliver this new energy system of the future. So it is based upon our previous experience, and it's built upon collaboration. And I think that's another thing that's really important in an island context. And I don't think that's unique to the Orkney Islands. I think islands do tend to work together. We have to work together to make our islands manage. And so with this project, the Reflex project is all about collaboration to make things work. Collaborating between individual companies, collaborating with local government, collaborating as best we can with the grid networks to make sure the project works. It's a pioneering project, and it's a demonstration project that can be rolled out across the globe, and that's part of the work that we and our partners in Reflex are doing. So could I have the next slide, please? So the simplest level, and I think the graphic we've got down the bottom kind of explains it. We are looking to digitally link renewable generation and associated flexibility to variable demand. And we're using a community-based integrated energy system. And integration has been mentioned a number of times in this training course already by numerous speakers. And what we are trying to do is manage that integration. So if we could, next slide, please. So within our system, there are three key elements. There's electricity, there's transport, and there's a heating element, as has previously been mentioned. And what the Reflex project is trying to do is link all of these and manage them as one system. And the way that we're doing that is initially looking at batteries as within the grid to try and store some of that curtailed energy that Mark was highlighting from the wind energy that we've got. So we have this problem that we've got an overabundance of renewable energy at certain times, and we don't have a strong grid mechanism to be able to distribute that you might be able to do on a national basis. But if we are going to decarbonize, we have to include transport, as been mentioned, and it's a key point in what we need to do. And in our area, heat is important, and in Indonesia, that can be easily transposed into cooling. So we've been looking at batteries, so batteries on domestic scale batteries and medium-sized batteries on industrial units, and then a couple of larger scale batteries where we can store energy and release it. Around the transportation side, electric vehicles also have batteries within them. So using the electric vehicles cleverly and smartly, like Mark suggested, can help us to store more energy and then distribute it when we need it. And we're also linking into hydrogen in a smaller way, which we think we can develop hydrogen as a storage vector within the project already. And I'll explain in a minute where that fits into the Reflex project. And there are ways around heating that we can store. So we can have boilers, and we have air and ground source heat pumps within our system that we can link digitally. And these can all be linked in what we're calling a virtual power plant. A number of people will have heard of virtual power plants, where the whole thing is managed, and although we have distributed storage, the whole thing can be managed virtually, like it's one battery, so we can store energy and release it as and when. You can imagine that that's quite a complicated system, and a lot of detail, why I showed the slide earlier with all the thing, but we are trying to integrate the whole thing. So could I have the next slide, please? So what are we actually doing in our integrated energy system, or Reflex in Orkney? So at the heart, in the center, we have a virtual power plant and modeling around that that's integrating all these different elements. A key point to the Reflex project is data. Gareth showed earlier a picture of our energy audit that we did for Orkney that sort of explains how energy at the moment moves around Orkney, how it comes into Orkney and how it's used. And understanding that in detail is critical to being able to develop a Reflex project. So to be able to do that, you need to be able to monitor what's happening as well as you possibly can. And that would include, in our case, a smart metering within our island. So there's at the moment, Orkney doesn't have many smart meters, but we're about to introduce them as part of the project where we can actually control things. I mentioned the batteries, so household batteries, a battery sitting in somebody's house outside, or the slightly larger business side batteries, modular scale batteries, and then maybe some larger batteries. The vehicles, domestic and commercial vehicles, will be able to hold a good part of the energy. And then in our case, like I've suggested, smart heating systems. So we also need to insulate and make buildings efficient. This whole thing needs to work together. Orkney, as anybody that's been here, and because we live here, and some of us are born here, will realise it can be a pretty cold place. So you need to make sure you've got efficient buildings when you're doing that in the project. So the next slide, please. So what does that look like in Indonesia? I just stuck in this slide just to say that, you know, we are looking at Reflex as a project in Orkney, and it's a demonstration project in Orkney, but we are replicating that project and suggesting the project can be replicated in a number of places around the world. And I just had a quick think about Indonesia and some of the things that could replace what we're doing in Orkney with things like electric vessels. And I know there's a project about an electric outrigger vessel that's going forward. Cooling is obviously going to be really important for Indonesia. That could be linked into a Reflex project, and things like solar heating and solar is going to be very important, as Chris mentioned earlier. So an integrated energy system that could work, a Reflex project that could work in Indonesia. Okay, next slide, please. So that was a very brief run through the Reflex project, and happy to give more information. That, like I say, that was a very high level and a brief introduction to Reflex. It's a very complicated project, but happy to take that forward. One of the other projects, and I mentioned hydrogen, and hydrogen is the other storage vector that we're interested in, the Reflex project, but not just the Reflex project. Mark mentioned two other projects that are probably world-renowned projects in the hydrogen sphere now, which are the Surf and Turf and the Big Hit projects, which we're looking at our smaller islands in the north end of Orkney, both Edie and Shappensea, that were facing some of these curtailment issues that Mark mentioned in his project, where they had wind turbines, they were producing electricity and they couldn't get rid of it. So what did they do? And these two projects looked at developing hydrogen, so electrolyzer on both the island of Edie and an electrolyzer on the island of Shappensea. The first one in the Edie was also linked to the EMEC Marine Energy Test Centre. And this photo, one of the photos on the right, you'll see the electrolyzer that they have, and also you'll see the Scott Renewables or orbital machine that is the biggest tidal machine in the world, producing 2 megawatts of power, and that was linked into this system through the EMEC test site. So the ED project had tidal turbines, it had a community wind turbine, all that were linked in through an electrolyzer and producing hydrogen. The hydrogen was then stored in specially built vehicles and then transported into the main town of Kirkwall, where it can be distributed. And at the moment, it has been distributed back into a fuel cell that powers our ferries, some of our ferries that harbour overnight in Kirkwall. So it is trying to see a way to decarbonise our ferries in the first scale. The second part in the Big Hit project in Shappensea, the electrolyzer is also linked into a community school where it heats the school, and again some of the hydrogen is then transported into Kirkwall, and we also have a fleet, the local authority of a fleet of vehicles in Kirkwall where they can use the hydrogen as a range extender in these electric vehicles. So the vehicles that they've got are completely decarbonised, and they can use hydrogen, or they can also use electric. So you can see from this system, this is starting to integrate as an integration project. And the fuel cell and the work on the harbour in Kirkwall is also linked into the Reflex project recently. So we're now trying to link in the whole project to make it operational. So the next slide, please. So I've mentioned what we're trying to do with the ferries. We also have another project in Orkney, or two other projects in Orkney, looking to use hydrogen in a retrofit a hydrogen propulsion system or a hydrogen storage system into one of our existing ferries, which is the one in the top left of your screen. And we're also on another project looking to build a completely new ferry that is linked to hydrogen. Both of these projects are in the early stages, and we're enthusiastic about them, being that we're an island and ferries are like our taxi service or our bus service, so it's really important. Vehicles, we do have vehicles in Orkney, buses that are electric at the moment, but we don't have any hydrogen ones as yet, but there is plans to look to either retrofit hydrogen fuel into our buses, and then also some of the larger vehicles, which we see a real advantage with hydrogen over the electric propulsion. And an even more innovative project called High Flyer in Orkney. We have a number of small size planes that travel between our islands, and there is a project looking at using hydrogen for aviation that's linked to Cranfield University, and that project will be trialling a hydrogen powered plane in Orkney within the next 2 years. So we are looking at all the different transportation vectors to see how hydrogen can fit in, or in some cases how electricity can fit into that project. So next slide, please. So this final slide was just one to talk. Mark's already mentioned the SMILE project. It's a community-owned project, and as with all islands, it's very important to bring the community along with us, and that's why within every island you need to make sure that they are part of the system. It's like going back to Mark's clever graphic about how we include everybody in it. So there's a number of within the SMILE project looking at integration of battery technology, power to heat, power to fuel, pumped hydro and electric vehicles, and electricity stored aboard boats. So you can see from the projects that we're working on, we're linking them all, we're integrating them in our island, and we're trying to demonstrate them. And we'd welcome any visitors to come and see what we're doing in Orkney. So final slide, I think, is just thank you very much, and Terry McCaskey.
Thanks, Ian. That's great. Can we move on to Gaynor, please, for the next part of this topic?
Thank you, Nia, and hello again, everybody. I'm going to speak to you about some of the sustainable solutions for island-based energy challenges. And I'm going to speak about two things: some of our principles around sustainability, and then I'm going to speak a little bit from our experience in Indonesia of working directly with communities. Okay, thank you. Next slide, please. So in terms of sustainability, I've just flagged up 3 key principles that I'm going to speak about here. The first being partnership, capacity building, and then at a more strategic level, the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. Next slide. So Aquaterra's approach to any of the work we do is always around collaboration and working in partnership. It's really important to us as a business. And we've developed the ABCG partnership model, which you heard Gareth allude to earlier. And that's where we feel really strongly that to have a successful partnership, we need these 4 component parts. And that is academia, business, community, and government. It's really important that we've got buy-in and commitment from all of those 4 elements for a partnership to achieve real impact on a project. Thank you. Next slide. So the ethos of our partnerships and the way we work is to really utilise the local knowledge, and that's been from our own learning as an island community. You'll all know that the level of ability and competence and knowledge and expertise right in amongst our own communities is really crucial and is very abundant, I would say. So it's important that we develop solutions that are fit for purpose and that they're relevant to particular geographies and communities. It was good to see what came out of some of the polls earlier today, where we speak about developing twin track strategies, so finding appropriate technologies for particular areas. So that might be a large scale development, or it might mean a really small scale solution for an off-grid community. So in one of the polls earlier, the audience felt that there was a 50-50 split between those approaches, which was really heartening. Our ABCG development model is important that we bring in the appropriate consortia to deliver on our projects, and really important to get the stakeholder engagement right at the outset so that we've got appropriate levels of influence to make projects work on the ground. Can I have the next slide, please? So I'm going to speak a little bit about what each of these partners provide in these contexts. So what do we get from our academic partners? Well, we get a range of new knowledge often, and evidence-based practice, and academia can often provide rigour to what we're trying to do in reality, and a real grounding in research. They've got some flexibility and an ability to test out new ideas, particularly in terms of innovation and new learning. And also they can often bring some finance or leverage into a partnership as part of that grouping to make something happen. Next slide, please. So as a business, Aquaterra as an example, obviously as a business partner in that grouping, and on what we bring is some real life project experience. Aquaterra's got a track record, for example, of over 900 projects that we've delivered over in sustainability over the last 20 years across the world. And what we bring, or other businesses bring, is an ability to apply that knowledge contribution from academia, to apply that into real life situations. In the areas that we're all working in marine or renewable energy solutions, it's all about innovation and finding creative solutions. And in terms of the consortium of an ABCG partnership model, the business element can often provide some flexibility or ability to act quite swiftly, where other partners are perhaps mired in a bit more bureaucracy, perhaps. And again, what business can bring is some finance to the table, and they can often provide investment into larger schemes and initiatives. Next slide, please. Most importantly, and it's been mentioned as a theme throughout today, that the community play a huge role in any initiative that we're looking to lead or develop. So the community really identifies what the project need is in the first place. It's really important that we listen to and work with communities to develop solutions that they need rather than what external parties think that communities need. And they provide a whole range of local knowledge to lead to project success. We can't work on projects in communities in isolation. It just doesn't work. So it is really important that there's buy-in from the community at the outset for what we're trying to collectively achieve. And community members and leaders can often be fantastic ambassadors or champions of particular projects and initiatives. They've got the capacity to deliver in these communities and often can provide a real healthy and robust supply chain right on the doorstep of where a project needs to happen. So, so they're a really crucial component of the partnership. And the next slide, please, just brings us on to the other key component of the ABCG model, and that's the government partners. So again, government defines that project need, and it was really helpful today to hear that strategic context from Pat Chris to outline all of the ambition across the whole of Indonesia, and to really show that government backing of this real agenda for change in Indonesia. And in my experience of working in Indonesia over the past, 7 or 8 years, it now feels like there's a real groundswell to make this move to implement some of these aspirations. And again, charismatic political leaders can be real ambassadors and champions. And I guess a lot of you guys in the audience today are the key change makers. You've got the ability and the influence as policy developers to affect this change right across the country. And again, as we've heard, there needs to be financial commitment at that government level to make change. Next slide, please. So just kind of in conclusion to that little bit around partnership, in terms of the ABCG model, we all need each other to achieve that success. So this model for us was really achieve something that's greater than the sum of its parts. And as I've said, each of those 4 pillars of academia, business, community, and government are all essential, regardless of what the scale of the project might be. And then what I would also add is that in a project context, it's really important that somebody within that partnership becomes the key representative, who's kind of the glue that holds the partnership together, if you like. They're the trusted and respected person able to engage and communicate right across the partnership. And the key thing in our experience is that this is about building enduring relationships. And that endurability, I guess, is the key to something that's really sustainable. We need to keep the partners focused on the same shared aims and project goals, and to be able to effectively and sensitively handle some of the challenges that might come up along the way. Okay, next slide, please. I've got one slide around the other principle that I referred to around capacity building. Now, we refer to this in Aquaterra as having a sustainable development toolkit. And in our toolbox, there's a whole range of things that we can draw from. So we've got all of our individual and collective island experiences. And with that, we have a whole range of island development specialists. We're able to do and use particular tools to do resource assessments, to do some road mapping, to do some strategic planning that we need to do at a higher level across our projects. We're able to look at different funding models and to look back at some of the conventional solutions that we've had in these communities, and then to look at what new and innovative or renewable options might be available. So our toolkit contains really successful and sustainable communities. We're often island people with island solutions. I think Mark Hull referred earlier to having a problem with a community. We can't wait always for somebody else to come in and sort that out for us. We need to work together to see what suits us and how we might go ahead and make some changes. We've got various strategic planning systems to work within, and we've got finance and investment initiatives. We've got a range of technology solutions. Again, this goes back to this twin track approach. Is it useful that we've got a smaller scale solution for one particular community, or is a larger scale solution more relevant? We need to build our community capacity and capability. And again, this collaboration word keeps coming up. But importantly, for real sustainable development, these themes around legacy and enduring relationships are something that I can't overemphasize here. Next slide, please.
Gaynor, sorry, just before you're moving on, we have a few minutes left. I know we're running late, but it would be, yeah, just a few minutes left for your presentation.
Okay,
15 minutes, please. Thank you.
Okay, and then I won't dwell on this. We've spoken about the Sustainable Development Goals, and they underpin all of the work that Aquaterra does and that we hope to achieve at a more strategic level. Have the next slide, please. And I'm going to move on to the next slide as well, please, just in the interest of time. I wanted to then just touch on some of the case studies that we've been involved with in Indonesian communities. And one of the projects that we worked on was in a small village in Aceh in North Sumatra called Pidijaya. This was a British Council funded project, and our partners from the ABCG model, we worked with UNSIA and DKP in Aceh and RGU in the UK. These are universities and polytechnics. The NGO we worked with was SRI Aceh, representing the community, and Aquaterra provided the business element, and we worked with various ministry officials. As folk know, Aceh is one of Indonesia's westernmost provinces, and it has numerous off-grid communities, and it's been constantly redeveloping itself since the 2004 tsunami. So can I have the next slide, please? So we worked in Aceh with our range of partners, and we were looking at helping to the community to develop their prawn ponds and aquaculture so that they had a better product to take to market. And if you can just flick back a second, please. Some of these pictures just show some of the resource assessment work that we did in the prawn ponds, some of the design work that we did with students and academics. And then on to the next slide, please. We then looked at implementing some of these designs in the community. We worked with the village to develop the site and some infrastructure. And we worked directly with students to manufacture the solutions that we took then to the community. And if you see the next slide, we then were able to install a small wind turbine with the community. Have the next slide, please. Similarly, we've done some marine energy work in West Papua, where we worked with a paper pulp mill and had partners from elsewhere in Southeast Asia. And if you show the next slide, you'll see how we were able to deploy a tidal turbine to prove this technology, and again working with the local supply chain in that very remote part of West Papua. The next slide, please. We've done work with our ABCG partners from UNAS, the University in Jakarta, with Heriot-Watt University and Plymouth in the UK. We worked with local planning agencies and the Takabonerate National Park to look at what marine or renewable energy resources would be most suitable for those island groups. You see the next slide, please. This shows some of the feasibility work that we did around what was possible in those island communities. And the next slide, please. And this shows some of our findings that solar PV, wind power, biomass and tidal current were the preferred solutions for these islands. And they were based on a combination of grid and distribution constraints and land availability constraints, which was significant for small island groups. And can we have the next slide, please? And just as importantly, there was a real focus on community engagement activity in these islands. I spent time with particular communities of interest in the small islands, learning from a whole range of people about their particular needs and what the solutions might mean for them in practice. And then finally, can I move on to the next slide, which shows a little bit about the training and capacity building that we've done across different parts of Indonesia. We've had experiential learning and welcomed numerous delegations from Indonesia to Orkney and Scotland, and we've delivered marine renewable energy courses to senior decision makers over in Jakarta. And the next slide shows finally just some of the visitors that we've had to Orkney, and I think some of the guys in the pictures here are also on the call today. So hopefully that's given you a bit of a run through. Terima kasih, thank you very much. Sorry for running over, Nia.
Thank you, Kinner. No, that's fine. We have a few minutes to quickly go through the polls. If Bahasa Global team can launch the poll, please. And we'll catch the discussion and questions and answers soon after. So yes, 3 questions as previously. Would be great if people could participate. And yes, as before, it's useful for us to understand different perspectives and from the different, because you come from different groups and understandings and background, it's also helpful for everybody in this training to see the different perceived barriers or perceived drivers, motivations, or the different thoughts on an opinion on certain issues. That's good stuff. Let's take another minute to that. I see some questions coming in already. Okay, that's really good. So the first one is asking about, have you had any experience working with smart energy systems? At the moment, most of you answered no, and quite a lot actually answering in planning to. And then the second one is, which of these do you think does not include in the challenges of developing offshore wind? There's a quite interesting spread in there. Shadow flicker comes up as the largest, and flights, navigation's next. And the last one is, in your opinion, what is the main challenge that needs to be undertaken to address the energy transition into renewables? So there's a good spread of between technical, finance, regulatory, natural resources, and human resources in the mix there. Okay, in the interest of time, I think I'll close this poll, and we could, hopefully we've captured most of the audience's viewpoints, and hopefully everybody can see the spread there. That would be great. Okay, so we have some questions in the chat room. I'd like to go to the first question, please. And in the meantime, anybody else, if you want to put a comment through or another question, please do so. Those that we can't answer just now, we'll take away with us and come back with the with the answers after the training concludes. So this question for you, Gainer, this is from Gena, from one of our Mentari colleagues. Could you share with us on how to include gender and inclusion aspect in the projects that you've been involved in, and what are the benefits and challenges around the gender and gender inclusion around the experiences, and how this affects sustainability of those projects? Gainer, would you like to have a response?
Yeah, thank you for your question, Gainer, and I'm very pleased to meet another Gainer. It's very unusual. So yes, it's a really good question, and it was something that I'd intended to put into my slides because it is a key issue. And in our experience working with communities, particularly in the remote, I'm thinking particularly in the remote part of the Takabanarate Biosphere Reserve, they're very much matriarchal societies in the small island groups, and there's very clearly defined roles. And it was quite a lot of the engagement that I had was with women who were basically the main caregivers and keeping the homes together and running those island communities, and also doing a lot of the processing of the fish production that was brought onto the islands. So they had a huge amount to contribute by way of what was required for their islands from their perspective, and very much had a role in delivering on islands. So I'm totally happy for you to get in touch with me outside of this event as well, Gainer, if you wanted to talk about this some more. We do have a variety of different policies and developments around the gender equality and social inclusion issues. So I'd be happy to discuss that some more and see how we might be able to work together, particularly through the Mentari programme. We could go on to discuss that there.
Thank you, Gainer. There's another question. This is around hydrogen storage. So would you be able to explain in brief the technical aspect of hydrogen storage? I think, Ian, that might be from your slides, if you want to come back to that.
Yeah.
And I think we still have Mark as well on the line, I think, hopefully.
All right, well, Mark can easily help as well. Obviously, we don't have long to go into the whole details of how it can be done. Hydrogen storage can be a challenge, and technically it's not too complicated, because you can use wind power or any renewable generation to produce hydrogen. But at the moment, it's not the easiest gas to store, and when it's not the easiest gas to store, the problem then is expense. Storage costs a lot of money, and so to make a small project efficient, that's where some of the challenges are. And in the Big Hit and the Surf and Turf project that I presented, or I talked about, some of the inefficiencies come into it as well. So when you're changing basically power produced by a wind turbine into a gas, and then transporting a gas, and then taking that gas and then putting it back into electricity in a different distance, you get some efficiency losses. And part of the work that both these projects have been doing is trying to reduce these losses as best they can. But again, with losses comes expense, because the cost of producing electricity and then changing its state, it becomes a challenge. So these are challenges that the whole hydrogen industry is facing, and as Pat Chris said in his piece, Indonesia is very much looking at hydrogen, and often hydrogen with vessels where there's a bigger demand for more power becomes more efficient. I don't know if Mark's still on the line and wants to add anything to that.
Thank you, Ian. That's really comprehensive.
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on. Yeah. No, okay, Sonia. Yeah, no, I mean, Ian's spot on there. I think in the in the surf and turf, the big hit projects. And what's a practical thing we did was, because the storage was expensive, we designed the storage was part of the transport as well. So everything was mobile and we didn't need to duplicate it. And that saved cost, because what you filled up and you moved it around, and it let you have one storage for 3 sites. And that was a small practical saving. But no, I think in the future, we always talk about hydrogen and its friends. I think you have to think about the other chemicals. Hydrogen is great, but the other ways you can make it easier to store for long term. So to make it into larger molecules, which are easier to store, you get an efficiency hit, but then you save a lot for long term storage, which is the real bonus and real opportunity for hydrogen. From my point of view, I think that's, yeah. Would you? And I see Ian nodding as well, so I don't want to contradict him. Yeah, that's good.
Thanks very much, both Ian and Mark. Thanks, Gaynor, as well. I'm conscious that we're 5 minutes over time, so I think we can close today's session, but we will see everybody again tomorrow with the different topics. And as I previously mentioned, those questions or comments that have not been fully addressed due to time today, we are collating them and we will be circulating them back to everybody in this room. The other parts that we will be making available is also on the training material. So all of the presentations, Bahasa Global will help to have this available to the participants. And the last one, I just had a reminder, or actually the link is already posted on the chat box. So for those who need to access the material, you can access it through the link provided. And the last one was, yes, if you could come back tomorrow, we will have more examples and materials, specifically looking at the grid as well as the integration of renewable energy into the system. If there's no last comments or questions from anybody around, I will close today's session. Thank you very much for everybody's time and looking forward to seeing you again tomorrow.
Thank you, Mania. Thank you. Thank you. Chris.
Yeah. I think Bu Nia, in the last session, perhaps maybe or tomorrow we can what you call review again if there is some question arise from the participant, because since the material of the presentation not have it over to them, then I think it's better to give the chance to ask again after they reading the presentation material. Actually, I have a lot of questions actually, but at the same time I need to accompany my Director General in the others meeting. So it's very interesting. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much, Bapak Ibu.
Thanks very much, Pak Chris. Absolutely, that point that's a very great advice. I will, after the presentations material shared, we'll have a chance tomorrow to try and revisit some of this discussion issue.
Thank you.
Terima kasih, Pak Chris.
Terima kasih.
Mari sampai ketemu besok, rekan-rekan semua.